Hello and welcome to another episode of the Establish the Edge podcast. I'm your host, Mark Dankenbring, and we'll be joined today by the projections crew you know and love, Jack Miller and Ben Gretch. Jack and I are part of the NFL projections team here at Establish a Run, entering our fourth year together doing this full time. Meanwhile, Gretch is our honored guest throughout this series. You can listen to his podcast, Stealing Bananas with Sean Siegel, as well as find his work at bengretch.substack.com. Gretch also just announced this week, that he is launching a new podcast with Jacob Sanderson called The Long View. Episode 1 there is up on YouTube already and can be listened to wherever you find your podcasts now. But today we'll continue to go division by division through the NFL, breaking down our season-long projections for each team across the league. We are into episode 7 of this series, and we'll feature the NFC East today, where we have two strong teams and, well, two not so strong teams, I would say. But Gretch, fresh off a family vacation, how you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. As you guys know, I had a drive back this morning, about an 8-hour drive. Cruised, it was a good, stress-free drive. We weren't actually going to record tonight, but I was like, hey, you guys mind if we do it tonight? I got some stuff later this week. Trying to, I complained about a sickness last week. We called it the flu game. Now I'm going to complain about driving fatigue. Anything I can do to downgrade my own performance or set expectations low,
Expectations are lowered, no doubt. Jack, first episode in a new apartment. How's it feel? How's it going?
It's going well. Gretch had an 8-hour drive. This is my first episode we're recording without a commute because I moved into my new apartment 3 weeks ago and I finally have Wi-Fi as of Saturday. So nice to be able to, get up off the couch and walk 10 steps over to the desk to record this at 8 p.m. at night instead of having to take an hour-long train ride. But excited to talk about the Bills and the Pats, not so much the other two teams, but we're going to do it anyway.
No doubt. Always good to get feel settled in after a move. So congrats on that. Eager to get into today's episode. We are going to start with a couple of the more intriguing teams. And right off the bat, let's go to the Buffalo Bills. Sean McDermott out as head coach here. We have former offensive coordinator Joe Brady now upgraded and promoted to head coach here for the Bills. He enters his, I guess, almost fourth season with Josh Allen. He kind of took over 2.5 seasons ago. So this will be his third full season, but overall, fourth year alongside Josh Allen here. The Bills bring in DJ Moore on a deal, and then don't lose too much in the wide receiver core, mostly just adding DJ Moore though. So interesting team to talk through here with a couple key moving pieces with a head coach and play caller, and then new theoretical wide receiver one here on a team level. At ETR, we're at 62.7 plays. Gretch is at 63.3. For pass rate, we're at 57.2%. Gretch is at 55.5%. So 62.7 plays for us is the second most in the NFL. But meanwhile, our pass rate at 57.2% is 28th in the NFL. So typically, you don't see that big of a gap in terms of projected plays per game and then pass rate. I feel like typically it's more aligned with higher pass rate teams tend to get off more plays. So Jack, I'm curious your thoughts on that here for the Bills on a team level, and if there could maybe be some downside here in the plays per game with Joe Brady taking over as head coach and play caller.
Yeah, we did see a jump in plays per game from 2024 to 2025. But I think that with how good this offense is and how much they can control games with the run game, it makes sense to expect above average play volume. We have a doc from our algo pass rate. Our algo pass rate is at 58%. We're projecting 57.2% right now. Gretch is even lower at 55.5%, and I don't really mind where he is, given that the Bills have been at 55.9% and 56.1% pass rates in the last two seasons with Joe Brady calling the shots. Not expecting a huge change in how this offense operates with Brady getting the call up to the big job. So I think that maybe that's a spot where we could potentially go even lower. I think part of what our algo is baking in is that it's difficult to have that low of a run rate for an extended period of time. So it's kind of just natural regression. But I certainly think that they want to run the ball because it's been so effective for them, as much as that isn't as much fun for some of the pass catching options here.
Yeah, and I'm kind of going the other way with it. When I see your guys' pass rate, wondering if I went too low. I always do it off of that expected pass rate off their Vegas win total, which is high. And so I have them at about -3%, which is what their PROE was the last couple of years. Their actual pass rate came in, I think, a bit higher as you were given the pass rates there. Came in well. I think I have the regular season pass rates because I think mine are a little lower, and maybe they were a little more pass heavy in the postseason, which would be natural, right? A little more competitive. They do have a tendency in the regular season to like play to their opponent. They've talked about like running Josh Allen more in games where they felt like they needed him. One of the things they're the league slowest pace in seconds per snap by my numbers, but they were better in neutral situations rank wise. It really leans that way in the situations where they're winning, right? Then they slow way down and they go run heavy. Like, it's kind of funny. You're talking about there's 2 fun teams in the division, 2 bad ones. This is a team that's going to score a bunch of points and they're super fun, but I'm glad I'm not doing the show with Leone because I kind of want to just bash on them. This is one of the least fun, like, good offenses in the entire league.
Absolutely. And, Thorman had a note in his pace column that he had the Bills ranked 28th in neutral pace last year. So again, towards the bottom of the league. So when I was kind of looking at our plays per game, I was like, man, maybe that is a little bit fragile, just given the run heavy nature of this squad. They also lose David Andrews to the Saints this offseason. They've had a pretty strong offensive line over the last few years, lose a key guard there. We have not had Brandon Thorne's offensive line rankings get released, but I am curious where he comes in on the Bills this year with a little bit of movement, because I think last year, like, they were bringing back all 5 starters from 2024, and there was a ton of continuity there. So there is a little bit of a change. But in terms of Josh Allen and his fantasy value, it's been pretty rock solid since 2020. He hasn't finished below the QB3. He's been either the QB1 or QB2 in 5 of the last 6 seasons in fantasy. And a lot of it comes down to his rushing profile there, Gretch, as you alluded to. And that's even been exacerbated over the last few seasons here. Over the last 3 years, he's had 41 rushing touchdowns on the ground and has been used around the goal line a ton. Last year, he had 13 rush attempts inside the 5-yard line. He scored 9 touchdowns on those 13 rush attempts. So is really weaponized around the goal line. That you could say it takes away from James Cook a little bit, but James Cook had about an equal rush attempt number inside the 5-yard line last year. But the pass volume has really dipped for Josh Allen over the past couple of seasons. He's averaged just 475 pass attempts over the last 2 seasons. In the 4 years prior, it was up closer to like 590. So it's dipped quite a bit just in raw volume. And that's kind of what we, attributed to Joe Brady a little bit once he took over the reins as offensive coordinator. They went a little bit run heavier. So, I'm curious, Jack, your thoughts on Josh Allen here. If he is going very well ahead of kind of the rest of the quarterbacks, especially in the best ball market. He's going in like round 3, whereas, QB2 Lamar Jackson isn't going until round 5. So is Josh Allen someone you're willing to pay a premium on going into this upcoming season?
He is. I did an article a few weeks ago on the rising cost of the QB2s. They're up really significantly in cost over the past couple of years. I believe it's 2 or 3 rounds. I don't have the numbers offhand in terms of what the, let's say, QB15 is going in drafts compared to where they were going a few years ago. And Josh Allen and the top end QBs, their ADPs have not changed. Part of that is because the scoring has gotten a little bit tighter between the true upper echelon of quarterbacks and the more mid-tier guys, but I don't think that it fully justifies the difference or the rising cost between the two. And Allen's been unbelievably consistent. He's averaged 23 points per game or more in 6 consecutive seasons. We did discuss on the AFC North podcast that maybe he doesn't have like a 28 plus point per game ceiling like a Lamar Jackson does, but he has 15, 12, 14 rushing touchdowns over the past 3 seasons. He had a career high 8 yards per attempt last year, despite having Khalil Shakir as his wide receiver 1. This is a spot where his sack rate did jump up. This is something we've discussed a couple times on this show. His sack rate was up last year, and he threw the ball away only 2.6% of the time last year. That was down from 5% in 2024. So kind of the opposite of what we talked about with Caleb Williams, where he's throwing the ball away a bunch to avoid sacks. Allen was actually taking more sacks last year, and that artificially propped up his yards per attempt. But from a fantasy standpoint, you're getting, he's arguably the best quarterback in the league. The rushing volume has been there and will continue to be there. The rushing volume inside the 5 is just so valuable, and he's coming off a career best yards per attempt season with a likely upgraded wide receiver core, which we'll get to in a few minutes here.
Yeah, we're
I'm
a little
gonna
bit behind.
disagree with that a little bit, I guess. I'm a little bit concerned about the Josh Allen ADP. Part of it is, I think for best ball, obviously the ceiling is really there, but part of it is the schedule as well. In Week 16, they're at Denver. Week 17, they're at Miami. We're going to talk about Miami, but that could be one of the games where the Bills just slow way down. And so for the price you have to pay for Allen, obviously you need those, Week 16, 17 kind of spike games. I'm a little concerned about whether his ADP is just. I mean, everything. I'm not really disagreeing with anything Jack said because Jack's stats were all on point. He's a stud and he should be going among the top QBs. Just in terms of whether it's worth the price, I think you're paying for the consistency of it all that you were saying, Mark, in terms of the QB1 and QB2 finishes over the last several years. Last year, I have the FFPC scoring in front of me, 24.3 points per game. He was the QB1. The year prior, Lamar was at 28.2, almost 4 full points per game better. QB scoring was down last year, which is part of why he was better. But we've talked about the late round quarterbacks being a deep group and really interesting. Jack's research into how that QB2 tier has risen, very meaningful. I do think in individual drafts you can sometimes find good prices, but you can get boxed out of QBs as well in certain drafts. So it's a challenging thing, but especially like in one QB redraft, I think paying up for Josh Allen is a pretty big mistake probably this year from a strategic standpoint, because I do think you're going to get prices in that QB2 tier that are lower. I think what Jack was saying was pretty specific to best ball, but I do kind of want to give that other side of that where I think Josh Allen from a consistency standpoint has really driven where his ADP is. I don't know that the ceiling's as high. One of the notes on him, one of the reasons he was able to differentiate last year, he had the highest rushing yards in the league for a quarterback at 579. That was the lowest number for a league-leading QB rusher since David Garrard in 2009. That's a stat that's been improving over the years. In 2024, the year prior, both Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels are right around 900 rushing yards. Allen didn't hit 600. So you're talking about 50% more. Both those guys get hurt in 2024. The fact that you get a little bit of a discount on those guys when they can add so much rushing yardage. Now, I agree with you guys on the rushing TDs. And Josh Allen's profile is, it's really, really good. I'm not trying to deny that. But this offense has gotten a lot slower. It has gotten a lot more run heavy, as we talked about. And so if the rushing TDs do, I think he's going to have plenty. But if they do trend away from him a little bit as he gets older, I think that could be a concern. Last couple of years, they had 30 rush TDs and 29 pass TDs. They had 32 and 30 the year prior. 30 rushing touchdowns is a ton. Like the fact that they've had those the last couple of years is a massive amount. This would be a positive James Cook point, but Joe Brady loves to run the ball in, basically. That has been a massive shift from what they were doing prior to Joe Brady. That it was a lot more pass heavy, and Josh Allen's pass TD rate has come way down as a result. Maybe he does throw a few more TDs if the rush TDs come down, but if some of the rush TDs shift away back toward the running backs or some types of like wide receiver, end arounds or whatever different things that they may try to do. I do think Allen's profile at the price you have to pay, it can get a little bit concerning at his age and those types of things. But I certainly get the upside case, and all the numbers are really, really strong for Allen.
I will say that my take was mostly from a best ball standpoint. I just pulled up the numbers. The QB 24 is up from an ADP of no higher than 170 over the previous 5 seasons prior to 2024. And this year he's going as at ADP 142.5. So you're basically paying a multi-round premium over the earliest that the worst QB2 went over the 5 seasons prior. And I think that in the article, it's hard to get into it all at once now. But I think that part of that is that the QB2 tier should be expected to score more fantasy points. And part of it is for some variance-based reasons, some of which have been games played. If you look at kind of the data breaking down the high-end quarterbacks versus the QB 13 to 24 quarterbacks over all of Underdog's Best Ball Mania history, you can kind of see over the past couple of years there's been a really unsustainable string of health from the QB2s, which I think is partially what's driving that increased ADP, even though I don't really think there's any reason to expect that to continue. And so if you compare the increased cost of QB2 to Josh Allen, whose ADP has stayed the same, or this applies to Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels as well, any of these high-end quarterbacks, I think that in comparison, they look like a pretty solid investment. In redraft, I do agree it makes less sense where you only need one quarterback and you can kind of wait. I mean, it doesn't really matter if you wait until QB 18 because all of the mid-tier QB2s are pretty similar. So redraft, I agree, but in best ball,
I think your research is great. I guess I would just probably be more optimistic on the ceiling on Lamar and Daniels is sort of the way that I would put it.
That's fair.
Because another thing on Allen is, go ahead. Yeah.
The rushing yardage is certainly superior with those two.
The other thing with Allen is under Brady the last 2 years, his pass yards per game, 219.5, 215.8. The 4 years prior, 250 plus. I mean, that stretches back to like 2020. But even in 2020, he was at 284. Like, yeah, that was a different landscape. But he was at 259, 268, 253. And then the last 2 years, 219, 215. I mean, you're talking the pass ceiling has been meaningfully lower for him, not just on the touchdown side as we hit on. But yeah, no, I think your research is great in terms of, especially in best ball and the higher QBs. I guess I'm just saying relative to like Lamar Jackson going 2 rounds further behind in a, you got to go win weeks 15, 16, 17 best ball landscape. I kind of like the ceiling for those guys a little more.
Just looking at the rushing TD totals from last year as well, Josh Allen was 3rd in the NFL with 14, and James Cook was 6th with 12. So two players in the top 6 and in rushing touchdowns. Naturally, you would expect that to regress a little bit, and that can kind of go in tandem with James Cook's profile, which we can go to that running back room now. In terms of inputs on James Cook, we're at 264 rush attempts. Gretch is at 281. We're at 37 targets. Gretch is at 43 there. Ray Davis and Ty Johnson are RB2 and 3 here a little bit. Ty Johnson a little bit more of a pass down oriented RB2, and then Ray Davis is probably like the handcuff you would want, but his kind of base work was really cut down last year after a pretty promising rookie season. But I do want to talk through James Cook here because he is elevated up to a first end of the first, early second round pick in best ball this year, and maybe some concerns again over kind of how efficient he's been around the goal line and just as a volume rusher. We did see things really condense on James Cook last year, though, excluding the Week 18 game where Cook had a couple carries, but Ty Johnson and Ray Davis handled the vast majority. James Cook had 80.5% of the running back carries last year in this backfield. So again, really consolidated. And I think that was the question that held people back from drafting him last year. He was going more in like the 3rd round and now is up to a 1-2 turn after showing that consolidation. So Gretch, I'm curious your thoughts here. I feel like James Cook, his receiving profile isn't super strong, but again, the rushing has consolidated, in one of the best offenses in the NFL. We project the Bills for the 2nd most touchdowns in the league this season. So curious if you think James Cook is worthy of an end of round 1 selection.
He's tricky because like I'm always into the high value touches, and there's a lot of people talk about the Pete Carmichael coming over from coaching under Sean Payton, and they love to throw to the backs and all that. But I mean, James Cook the last few years has run fewer routes than his 2 backups combined for. I mean, they both play a little bit. Ty Johnson plays a little in the pass game. You don't love to see like the secondary running backs running more routes combined than your stud number 1. I mean, he got 309 carries last year. He's a workhorse. He's an absolute monster as a rusher. But this idea that his like receiving is going to absolutely spike. I was looking at that at your guys' projections right when we came in. I was wondering if I was light, and you guys are, I mean, basically in the same range as we always are. You're like 6 targets lower than me, where it's like we're basically projecting the same kind of thing, right around 40 targets. I'm just above 40, you're just below it. But you're seeing the same thing I am, which is Ty Johnson and Ray Davis are going to probably be involved in the targets and running the routes and those things. And they use those guys interchangeably in the pass game. This is one of the teams that has done some of the air yard stuff and used the running backs deep. And James Cook had a few last year, but the year prior, Ty Johnson and Ray Davis both did, and James Cook didn't. And so it's kind of gone back and forth, like who's on the field when they want to run like a running back into a vertical route. And then the like targets per route run have been pretty similar in the offense, and that like it looks like they just kind of rotate or don't like get the ball to James Cook in the pass game with intent the way that some of the other like Devon Achane we'll talk about later. His targets per route can be so high, although who knows how it'll be in this offense going forward. But anyway, I am concerned about James Cook's receiving. I think the rush TD, while it's been massive the last couple years and it was very low prior, it feels like it's due for regression. I think that's more stable than it seems, just because of the team rush touchdown trends we were talking about. They've been like 30 rushing TD. I'm talking about Josh Allen's maybe coming back a little bit, but like maybe that's a big reason why his TDs are there. But I think Josh Allen's rush TDs are already priced in, basically. I kind of think Cook's maybe as well to a degree. I think he's a high floor play. I have a hard time with him, again, in the first round. This is an offense to me that feels like the idea that when they get out ahead and they win, they want to slow things down. Like, it feels like the pie is not quite big enough with this, playing slow, and they've been, especially as we get to the pass game, they've been unconcentrated with their targets. These two are the most interesting, Allen and Cook. They're the ones where they can concentrate a lot of touchdowns on the ground. I struggle with Cook's price too, man. I really do.
Yeah, and to the note with him splitting passing routes with Ty Johnson, last year going into week 18, Cook had a 37% route rate. Ty Johnson was at 34%. So almost even between those two backs before you factor in Ray Davis. Jack, any thoughts on this Buffalo backfield, because it has been a massive fantasy producer over the last couple of years, and curious your thoughts as well, as we did see Ty Johnson kind of flip Ray Davis a little bit last year for like the favorite for RB2 snaps and touches. Is there a handcuff that you prefer in this backfield?
Yeah, I think Ray Davis is the handcuff. I think, as we saw last year, Ty Johnson is likely in a neutral game script, has a pretty good chance to out-carry Ray Davis in any given game. But in Week 18 last year, we saw Ray Davis out-carry Ty Johnson 21-13. In 2024, in the one game that James Cook missed, Ray Davis had 20 carries for 97 yards and I think 3 catches on top of that. So I think Ty Johnson, they trust him a lot on pass downs, but I think if James Cook were to go down, it would likely be Davis inheriting the bulk of the rushing. I'm sure Ty Johnson would see an increased role as well, but I think Davis would get the majority of carries. I echo Gretch's sentiments on the pass down role, but it is something that they keep harping on. It seems like every year and even mid-season, they always talk about, we need to get James Cook more involved in the pass game. We always need to get James Cook more involved in the pass game. They hire Pete Carmichael. So maybe at some point they will actually do it, but to this point, they haven't. He had just a 7.6% target share last year. That's really not good, certainly for someone with his receiving abilities. The last thing that I think is probably worth bringing up with Cook, but I'm curious how you guys feel about this, is that James Cook had 309 carries last year in the regular season. He weighed in at 199 pounds at the NFL Combine and had 230 carries throughout his entire college career in 4 years. There's a part of me that wonders if there is an increased risk of, I don't know if it's injury or decreased effectiveness, given that he doesn't have the history of a workhorse, or if last season can pretty much alleviate any and all of those concerns.
I have fewer concerns about that when we know that the guy has the workhorse background and the workhorse credentials. Like, we talk about workhorse being a skill. I guess relative to that, then it is more concern, right? Like, I don't feel confident in Cook, but like the fact that he just did it last year is helpful. One of the things about the passing stuff is they love him on the ground so much, and I do think that's kind of how they balance his workload, is by using the backups in the pass game. It's not what we love for fantasy. Like, I think sometimes we get so obsessed with fantasy, like not us on the show, but just the market, where it's, oh, we want him to use him in all the ways that are most valuable for fantasy. Like, the Bills want to use him in the way that they think he's most valuable, which is as an explosive runner. And then they just don't care as much. I mean, they talk about wanting to use him on the pass game, to Jack's point, but they never really end up doing it, because that's how they balance his workload, it seems. It's more like 20 years ago when teams used to do that with their workhorse runners, like a Sean Alexander or something, or Adrian Peterson every year. We're gonna throw to Adrian Peterson more in the pass game, but it's like you're already running him on first and second down every single time. So maybe on third down we have to let him, have a breather. Like, you got to take him off the field sometimes. I mean, to that point, if they're going to use him a ton more in the passing game, I don't know if I would be with Jack. I think it's a great take. I would not want to bet on that sustaining, because it's not something that we've seen a ton of. I think I'm with Jack. I've never really been into Ray Davis, because I do think Ty Johnson plays a good amount and he's going to split number 2 duties in those things. I kind of think Davis could be a pretty big handcuff this year because of the team rushing trends, how stable the really high rushing TDs have been and all that. Like, Davis would presumably get all the carries and all the goal line rushes and have a high rushing TD rate if Cook was out. And that's where, I think Davis becomes a pretty fun handcuff. He's going pretty cheap too. So yeah, I think the Cook workload concern, when I'm taking a first round running back, I want him to have a big receiving role, in part because I don't want him taking 300 carries, between the tackles. It's a little bit tricky.
Yeah, I agree. I've been taking Ray Davis a lot towards the end of drafts because he is so cheap, and the backfield has not changed at all since last year, and he's going like 60, 70 picks later than he was last year. And in my mind, again, the roles did flip a little bit towards Ty Johnson as the RB2 in base, but I do think Ray Davis is the higher upside handcuff that you'd want there. Let's go to the wide receiver room there, again, headlined by DJ Moore, who's an offseason acquisition, was traded with a 5th-round pick to the Bills in exchange for their 60th overall pick in this previous draft. And then DJ Moore, Khalil Shakir, and after that, it's a pretty muddled wide receiver room. So let's talk through those top 2 guys here first. On DJ Moore, we're at 96 targets. Gretch is at 112. On Khalil Shakir, we're at 81 targets. Gretch is at 102. So again, typically Gretch runs hotter than us, but I would say this gap is probably on the upper end of some that we've seen at for the wide receiver room. And I feel like I've been a bit of a DJ Moore apologist and have seen him a little bit more favorably than Jack. So I was interested to see where Gretch came along in here. But then as I was like prepping for the show and diving in even deeper, I'm like, man, yeah, there might not be a whole lot of pass volume in this offense. And I'm curious, Gretch, your thoughts first, just on what you think like the route share ceiling for DJ Moore is. Last year, Khalil Shakir led the team with like a 71% route share. And obviously we want our wide receiver ones to be up a bit higher than that, into the 80 and 90%, which is where DJ Moore was last year. He still held an 80% route share. Do you think that given the acquisition and what they're paying Moore, do you think he is going to be kind of like the bona fide wide receiver one and get that 80+% route share that we'd like to see here?
I do have a lot of optimism about that part of the Moore discussion. The fact that they traded a 2 for him, the fact that the conversation at the end of last season was about the lack of wide receivers and getting Josh Allen. One of the things right after they traded for him, they guaranteed some 2028 money, like 3 years down the road, that they reportedly like didn't need to do. It was like, it wasn't really an extension. They were basically just like, we want you to know that we think you're going to be good through your age 31 season, so that, I don't know, you'll try harder. It was kind of a weird like team building move to just like guarantee him a 3rd season. But I think from a fantasy football perspective, I think it signals real intent. It signals a commitment to the player over multiple seasons. They really want to make that work. I think he's going to play a lot. When I wrote up this team, I do like little signal and noise in my little off-season signals thing. I said his yards per run the past 2 seasons were noise, 1.44, 1.22. Had the weird season in Caleb's rookie year with Shane Waldron and all that. Last year, he's kind of deprioritized, as some of the rookies and other guys are, and obviously the Bears decide to move on and trade him. I don't think those things are going to carry over, the low yards per route run, especially because they were driven by cratering targets per route run. It was the target earning. He was at 14.3% last year. I think his targets per route run is going to be high in Buffalo. Like, they're going to feature him. They're going to make him the number 1. I think all that's going to work. I am a little bit concerned about whether, we're going to get peak Moore, and then whether it's still going to be unconcentrated to some degree. It's interesting how much more concentrated I am than you guys. I guess, I didn't really know how to land it. Obviously, I do kind of project from a more optimistic standpoint for the offense. I think the best case for these guys is DJ Moore and Khalil Shakir as the top 2 guys, and then, Dalton Kincaid kind of working in. But I do think the secondary players are important. They've talked about Keon Coleman a ton. I think you guys are higher than me on Josh Palmer. I only have 31 targets for him, but I do think he's like relevant. And I thought I was maybe on a limb on that, but he had a high ankle sprain in week 6 last year. He was averaging like 39 yards per game. It's not great, but that's like, he didn't really ever recover from that. And that's like a potential role that will work in. Skylar Bell had 101 catches at UConn last year, has a 9.8 RAS, elite metrics in all the athletic categories. Like, he looks really interesting if he wasn't stuck in a, rotational offense. You guys have a lot more targets for him. I'm kind of liking what you guys have on some of those spots. I'm not really into Keon Coleman. There's, like I said, a lot of talk about how they're going to make him work. He was the big one, obviously, when they fired McDermott, and you have the whole thing, Pagula sitting up there, and it was McDermott who liked him and not Brady Bean. I don't know. It was the pointing fingers about Keon Coleman and making him the whole discussion point. And then Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator, winds up being like, yeah, I was really into him, and then he gets the job. Regardless, Shakir also last year had a high ankle thing in the preseason, and he ultimately got an ankle procedure this offseason. I think he kind of played through it all year. That's part of why probably I'm a little higher than you guys on him. I do really like the Shakir profile for what he is. He's been really good in that high volume catch and run role. we probably need more air yards for him to be super fantasy viable. I project ADOT and everything. I have his ADOT very low. I don't have him as super efficient. I do think some of the ball in hand stuff should be better this year than last year, where he was kind of playing hurt all year with a leg injury. It's not a great injury for that type of a player. And that's stuff that DJ Moore does well too. So I think Shakir's kind of an issue for Moore. I have Shakir only 10 targets behind Moore. I have him well ahead of you guys. You guys have a gap of about 15 targets between the two. I'm ahead of you on both of them. As I was talking about, I have it even more concentrated than you guys, even though in my notes I have it like this is the most unconcentrated offense ever. So I kind of like your guys' splits a little bit better there. But I do think Shakir is meaningful. And I came into this projection really wanting to be high on DJ Moore. He's a guy whose talent I've always been really high on. I've really liked. I felt like I'd have an opportunity to get back on him after a team traded a lot for him and is probably set to make him the number one. I do think it's a tricky offense for that and how they do everything and the different packages and all that.
It is tricky, and like you said, I with about DJ Moore and just like kind of betting on the talent and the investment, I wanted to be there as well, and that's a spot where we maybe could get more condensed. But Jack, I do want to toss it to you with your thoughts there, because we saw DJ Moore in 2023 had a 25% target per out run that dipped to 22% in 2024, and last year down to 17%. That includes the playoffs as well for that 17% number there for DJ Moore. But I am a little. Like I see the downside here as well, just with a limited pass volume offense. So curious your thoughts on the top here on DJ Moore and Khalil Shakir, since we are a little bit lighter there than Gretch.
Yeah. It sounds like Gretch has a little bit. I was a little bit more concerned on the target earning last year. I just kind of thought it was bad that he didn't have a single game higher than a 20.6% target share last year. When Rome went down last year, he had a 9%, 18%, and then that 20.6% target share last year. And that's with Burden never exceeding a 66% route rate. They were playing guys like Olamide Zaccheaus and Ja'Day Walker for significant snaps over Burden, and still DJ Moore wasn't really earning fantasy relevant volume. I know they gave up a lot for him, but I view that downtick in target earning is a pretty significant negative. He was at 8.7 yards per target over his first 4 seasons, 8.1 over his last 4. 8.1 is nothing bad, but it is decreased efficiency, and it's not like he had awesome quarterback play to start his career in Carolina either. But it was largely just the decreased target earning and yards per out run numbers that had me a little bit concerned on Moore, despite the Bills giving up a lot for him and seemingly liking him, along with a little bit of the lack of concentration in this offense that you guys mentioned. But Moore, I just had some concerns about Moore heading into his age 29 season after the year he just had in Chicago.
I'm probably overstating the kind of narrative-based stuff that the Bills are going to really want to get a lot out of him, because I think you made some great points there, especially if you go look back at the efficiency early in his career. The evasion stuff was a lot better. Like you mentioned, the first 4 years versus the next 4 years. First 4 years, this dude was a ball-in-hand demon. Evasion rates were really good. Yak per reception were good. He would get some rushing work, and he was really good at that, as well as yards per carry were always super high. It's been lower across the board. He's still gotten some rushing work. His yards per carry have been worse each of the last 4 years than any of the first 4 years. It's a very small sample, but the evasion stuff has gotten a lot worse. Last year was his worst missed tackles forced per touch of his career, and quite a bit down from most of the other years. I guess I'm kind of taking that as a little bit of like effort and fit in the offense, and that maybe he'll be a little bit rejuvenated. He is only 29. I think Jack makes great points there too. I just wanted to know.
No doubt, and I think it is fair to question his motivation / just like commitment and excitement to play for the Bears last year. There's several like moments in key games where he's like walking off the field mid play, kind of quits on some blocking downfield. Certain things where it was just hard to tell if DJ Moore was all in or not. And I think his relationship with the Bears just soured a little bit, kind of on that note, and with the ascendance of some younger talent around him as well. Khalil Shakir, I think is an interesting one, just because if we do expect DJ Moore to be, like the clear wide receiver one in routes, Khalil Shakir is over a 70% slot player in his career. And then you have, DJ Moore primarily outside, Josh Palmer and Keon Coleman project to play primarily outside as well. And the Bills are kind of like middle of the pack in terms of 11 personnel usage. So I'm a little bit worried if DJ Moore does come in and demand more targets, that like Shakir's target per out run will dip quite a bit. If you go back to 2023, he only had a 16% target per out run playing next to Steph Diggs, and Steph Diggs and that was still, I would call it his prime. Is probably a better target earner than DJ Moore, but I do think there is some concern there again, just given his super low ADOT role and the routes not necessarily being as strong as honestly I thought. I thought Shakir would be higher than like 70% routes last year, but it's not amazing for him, I don't think.
That point about inside outside, one of the things about Moore that just reminded me, like Brady when he was talking about him, because Brady famously coached him back in Carolina for a year. He's talking about like, I know what DJ Moore is. I know he can play outside. He can get vertical and all this stuff. And I was like, yeah, I mean, one of my favorite parts about DJ Moore when I was like always a really big DJ Moore guy younger in his career was that he could do everything. I like the receivers that can win short, deep, that are great ball in hand, that get you efficiency a ton of different ways. He can do all of that, but it's not really what, like the ball in hand and a lot of that stuff is more the DJ Moore, thesis. I don't think of him as like a deep like threat. And if that's the fact that they're like emphasizing that he's this outside receiver that can get vertical at age 29 is not really why I would think you would pay to acquire him. The fit that was anyway. I did this projection a while ago, so I'm like a little rusty on my notes. But as you said that as well, and what Jack was saying, I was just like, yeah, I mean, that was another note I remember seeing that I was a little concerned about, where it was like, I mean, they're excited to have him, but they're trying to get certain stuff out of him that maybe isn't the right stuff at this stage of his career.
Yeah, and I don't think the secondary wide receivers are super fantasy relevant here, but I did want to mention on Keon Coleman that the Joe Brady quotes on him have been pretty interesting. His first quote from January 30th, like right after he was promoted to head coach, he said, "I told Keon Coleman that the best thing that's ever going to happen to Keon Coleman is that I got named head coach. The same guy that stood on the table and wanted Keon Coleman is the same guy that's going to be doing everything he can to continue to get Keon Coleman to reach the level that we know he can." So I don't know. I thought that was a little interesting and just a vote of confidence, because it does seem like the McDermott Keon Coleman thing, and you mentioned that presser last year, Gretch, like the vibes were just off between those two, and maybe Joe Brady will kind of lean into Keon Coleman a little bit, but again, I don't think there's a whole lot of fantasy relevance there on a lower volume, passing team where he's going to be like the wide receiver 3 at best, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big argument I think for Moore, is that if you want to look at it from like the long view perspective, like he is this dude that has been better throughout his career than I mean, Josh Palmer, Keon Coleman, some of these other names. Like who's the ceiling talent here? Like what they actually are in their NFL career. Khalil Shakir maybe, but like we were talking about, very very specific role. If it's not DJ Moore hitting, it's going to be a not very fun passing game again, probably.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's one more name to talk through, and that's Dalton Kincaid in the tight end room. In terms of projections there, we're at 71 targets. Gretch is at 78. We're at 8.1 yards per target, and Gretch is at 8.4. I bring that up only because Dalton Kincaid's efficiency metrics last year were just out of control. He was at 11.4 yards per target. That includes the playoffs. He was up above a 3.0 yards per route run, but he only had a 45% route share last year. So it was really limited in terms of when he was on the field, but hyper efficient when he was out there. That was a dip. Those 45% routes was a dip from 2024, where he was at 59%. And in his rookie season, he was at 69%. So, 2 of the last 3 years, he's been sub 60% routes, which is just not great as a reliable fantasy asset there, Jack. So I'm curious if you're a believer in Dalton Kincaid, and kind of if you think he's a worthwhile bet in fantasy, on just hoping that like the health improves and he can stay out there and run more routes, because on a per route basis he's been pretty strong and is a young former first round draft pick. So curious your thoughts on Kincaid and this upcoming season.
Yeah, it's purely just a routes question. He had a torn PCL all of last year, Dawson Knox said, and that was later confirmed to be true. And there's already been some allusion to having to manage Kincaid a little bit. Roto World reported that both Joe Brady and Brandon Beane said that they'll have to manage Kincaid's practice time in 2026. Brady said after the season that there's a lot of things he's pushing through that you guys might not see. He didn't get surgery for the torn PCL that he was playing with all of last year. So I think that there is like a real route ceiling here. I don't think that he's going to ever be like the 80% route guy. And I think that kind of limits his fantasy upside. On a per route basis, very good player in a very good offense. So I think he's fine. And I think that the market is aware of both his per route dominance last year as well as the route limitations. But yeah, the ceiling from a playing time perspective, I think, remains in pretty big question with the injury stuff ongoing.
As efficient as he was, if you look at like PPR points per game, he was tight end 15 last year, I think, in the list that I'm looking at. His yards per out run was 2.79. His targets per out run the last couple of years have been massive for a tight end, up around 25%. And then his yards per target really spiked last year, and it really shoots his yards per out run. I mean, that's the PFF routes, right? So a little bit different scale, as we always talk about. But despite a yards per out run of nearly 3, he went over 50 actual receiving yards 3 times in the regular season. Like, it doesn't matter how big your yards per out run is if you're not running routes, to Jack's point. I mean, if you read through the Coach Speak Index breakdown all offseason, it's what Jack said, but his knee was flaring up. They had to limit him because of it. Then he didn't get surgery. Their plan is to rehab and strengthen the knee and then also be able to play him more off of that. And I'm out on that plan probably, right? And first of all, when you have that efficient of a season on a limited route share, you want the out of more volume if the efficiency regresses. I don't always want to regress out efficiency, but that is such elite yards per out run, like per route efficiency, that you probably do have to understand that the only way down, the only direction to go is down from that. And so you want the ability to add routes. I'm concerned about that extrapolating already, even if you do add routes. But then we have this flip side issue of like, how does this strong per out profile expand? He's not going to add routes. It just genuinely doesn't seem like it's even possible from a health perspective. And especially because like he didn't get the surgery. He didn't do these things. He's just trying to rehab it and strengthen and I don't know. Maybe I'm missing the boat there, but I have a hard time with the guy that's going where he's going. As efficient as he was last year, it's based off of that, but he can't really grow the role. And so it's just, I mean, I'm not trying to like sorry, Leone, if you're listening to this, I'm not trying to be out on every single Bills player, but like I have a hard time with the prices of their good players.
For sure. And I do think it's hard to see kind of like the path to super elevated routes here, because they did sign Dawson Knox to a 3-year, $20 million extension. They have Jackson Hawes, who if you listen to some other more real life football focused pods, they'll talk about how elite of a blocker Jackson Hawes is. And he kind of like started like this, or it was one of the impetus players for like the getting a blocking tight end to really elevate your run game and just kind of like what you can do in heavier personnel. He's not going anywhere. And then Dalton Kincaid has played over 75% of his pass snaps are in the slot or out wide in his career. So it's just kind of hard. He's not your traditional inline tight end that's going to be out on the field a ton. And so I do think it's hard to see the path to more than like 60-65% of routes being the ceiling there for Kincaid. All right, let's move along to the New England Patriots. Quite a bit of continuity here on the coaching staff, but they do bring in 2 big wide receivers, one of those being A.J. Brown, obviously with the big trade this offseason. Then they signed Romeo Doubs to a 4-year deal as well, $68 million contract for Doubs, $39 million guaranteed there. Steph Diggs out of the picture here. Josh McDaniels returns as the play caller for the Patriots. On a team level, we're at 61.3 plays for the Pats. Gretch is at 62.2. We're at a 59.1% pass rate. Gretch is at an even 60% there. So relatively similar, not as close as we've been on some other teams there. But Jack, the Patriots were, I would say, kind of like the breakout offense of 2025, and the prices have come up quite a bit on them this offseason. They do get A.J. Brown here, but here's your thoughts on a team level here for the Pats. And they all, I should mention too, they had like a very historically easy schedule last year, which will get much tougher this year and probably change up how the offense plays a little bit.
Yeah, we're just at our algo on both plays and pass rate. They were 4th in football last year with a plus 1.9% pass rate over expectation. That includes the playoffs, which means it includes the snow game in the AFC Championship game. So if you throw that out, the pass rate over expectation would be even higher because that was a really high run rate game. They were slow last year at 29.3 seconds per play. Thorman kind of alluded to in his pace preview that with them facing a more competitive schedule, that the pace could come up a little bit. So that could be a spot that maybe we could look at with Gretch being higher on the play volume than us. Josh McDaniels in the past has had some faster offenses from a play volume standpoint, and it stands to reason that if they're in more competitive games, they're draining the clock less. They could run more plays. Thorman also noted that there have been reports of them practicing no huddle more. Thorman, being the Patriots fan, has some ears on the ground there, so that's maybe even particularly valuable. But Yeah, I mean the I expect them to prefer to pass again this year, given how good Maye was last year, and maybe a little bit of room for the play volume to increase. But yeah, I think that this offense is clearly ascending under Maye, and makes sense to expect good output again.
Yeah, I like all those notes. I was having a hard time with the pace and the pass rate, and kind of just middled it a little bit on both. Like reading Thorman stuff where he's like, I could be optimistic. Wasn't sure. I mean, I agree. I think he's usually really pretty dialed into the Pats as well. Like some people are fans of teams and then they're like a little bit homers, but Thorman always nails the Pats. So I was maybe running a little hot on play volume, but I was taking some of his notes as some decent optimism there. They had a positive pass rate over expected last year against a low expected pass rate. They did add some run pieces. They also added A.J. Brown. Obviously, they still have an above average schedule as well. It's like they had a really easy one last year, but it's 12th best again this year. One of the things I think is really interesting with this team, like from a top-down perspective, is it's kind of similar to what we were talking about with the Bills. They used a lot of different guys last year. Their targets rotated throughout the year, but they were like pretty balanced by the end. If you look at so they had the really easy regular season schedule, then they had 4 really hard postseason games. So that's, as we get into May, it's gonna be really interesting to talk about because like his EPA per play, best in the league during the regular season. Then you go look at the postseason, he's substantially in the negative. He's 11th of 14 main starting QBs in EPA per play, and he won 3 games. Like a lot of these QBs just went 0-1 in their postseasons. How did he finish 11th out of 14 in EPA per play, going 3-1 in the postseason? It's crazy against these harder defenses. But in that postseason run, 6 Patriots between 10 and 20 targets, no one over 20, very balanced across the 4 games. Their team leader Diggs was at 20. His targets per out. A lot of people have made a big deal about Diggs' per out profile. You go look at what he did in the postseason when the stuff got a lot more difficult. He was really pretty poor. Everything came crashing down. And that's 4 games. I mean, that's a quarter of a regular season. A lot of people have talked about their regular season. I don't think are talking enough about the offense in the postseason. And it was an important sample because it was the toughest defenses they really faced all year. And the offense did really struggle. So I think a similar thing happened at running back. We see different things flip over time. We'll get there. But I was going into this offseason thinking they definitely had to address the weapons. They've done that with A.J. Brown and Romeo Doubs. I think the offense is going to look a little bit different. And then the other thing with Drake Maye, I'm talking about how he struggled against the tough defenses. Remember, this is a guy who, when he was drafted, was the youngest quarterback in the class. They were talking about they couldn't start him right away because he needed time to develop. He was an age 21 rookie. Last year, he's age 22. He's going into his 3rd season right now, still super young. The coaches have been talking this offseason, not really in like a bragging way, just sort of, I think, casually. But again, the Coach Speak Index quotes have been clear about how like the game just makes sense to him. And he's very advanced in the way that he's progressing this offseason. It would help understand why he had such good explain why he had such good production at young ages in college and has been so good in his first couple years in the NFL. I don't want the age thing to get missed on Drake Maye. There are some concerns specific to 2025 and the easy schedule, but this dude has been way ahead of the curve for his age.
The Drake Maye metrics last year were pretty insane. He had the 2nd highest ADOT in the NFL at 9.5 yards, yet he led the NFL with a 72% completion rate. He was like 3 percentage points clear of any other quarterback in completion rate. And I was just looking at some other quarterbacks with similar ADOTs as him. Again, Drake Maye had a 9.5 yard ADOT, 72% completion rate. Lamar was 9.7, 64% completion rate. Trevor Lawrence 9.5, even with Drake Maye 61% completion rate, so 11 percentage points lower. And then Matthew Stafford was also 9.5 at 65% completion. So I was interested to see where Gretch came in here. He's projecting Drake Maye for a 67.3% completion rate. We're down a bit at 64.5%. So that might be a spot we want to come up again, just given Drake Maye's, what he showcased last year, and again, kind of like the steady drumbeat of how of how he's taken things in stride this upcoming year. You also add A.J. Brown to this offense, can't hurt that too much either. In terms of efficiency, we're both we're at 7.8 yards per attempt. Gretch is a little bit higher, closer to 7.9, but across the board, outside of just like the yardage total that's comes from the completion rate elevation, we're pretty much in line there on total touchdowns and then rushing production. One thing I wanted to mention on Maye that I think is like a potential, not necessarily like floor bottoming out, but all of his rushing production has come from scrambles. They only used him with 13 designed rush attempts all of last season. And he's been, a 10% scramble rate in his career. He hasn't really been used around the goal line. He only had 2 carries inside the 5-yard line last year, 0 touchdowns. So that's one where like I'm pretty interested to see where they go with Drake Maye's career in this rushing, if they do use him in the design fashion at all, or if they decide to use him around the goal line. I think that's really where like an overall QB1 ceiling fantasy season could come from, because he is 6'4", 225 pounds. Meanwhile, Josh Allen 6'5", 237, so a little bit bigger. But we know Drake Maye is that athlete and has the size to potentially be used around the goal line. So I am like interested just to monitor if they decide to use him in the designed run game at all, because it is a little tougher just to rely on pure scrambling for the rushing output.
And his rush attempts per game did rise last year, but his yards per attempt or per carry, 7.8 as a rookie, and then down to 4.4 last year. As a rookie, I was like, maybe this guy's just a really exceptional runner. There had been like Josh Allen rushing upside comparisons. I think year 2 takes us off of that track personally. And so I was curious where you guys wound up on him. When I was talking about his age, I called his rookie year his age 21 year. I just want to correct that. He was age 22 rookie. He turns 24 in August. He'll be going into his age 24 season this year in year 3. I got through the projection, and I project pretty optimistically for everyone. Obviously, some of the teams where the offenses have more touchdowns, I wound up with a lot higher ceiling. One of the concerns here is they were second in points last year against that really easy schedule. They're projected pretty middle of the pack this year, so it really hurts Maye's TD projection the most. I ended up having to kind of nuke his pass TD and his rush TD rates down a little bit, as well as the running back rush TD rates down a little bit, to hit sort of that market touchdown expectation. Drake Maye did not come out as high even though I'm really optimistic on the player. And I was trying to talk about how I think this offense is really interesting going into the next year and could take another step forward. He didn't come out as high to me, and I have similar concerns with him as I did with Allen in terms of the really high ADP. Is it, Jack, I see you nodding. Is that how you're feeling as well?
Yeah, I was going to say that basically how you felt about Josh Allen is kind of how I feel about Drake Maye. Obviously, the prices are significantly different. I think on Underdog, Drake Maye goes like 30 spots later than Josh Allen, so it's a different question entirely. But Maye had almost 9 yards per attempt, 8.9 yards per attempt last year, over 100 carries, and he averaged 21.5 points per game. That was good enough for QB3 on a per game basis. And that's a very good season, but it's not like this game-breaking, world-changing fantasy season that we've kind of alluded to being the goal when you draft a quarterback early. And until he gets maybe the red zone role that Mark alluded to being a possibility, I am not super optimistic that he's going to reach that level. Like Mark said, he only had 2 carries inside the 5-yard line last year. That's really not even close to what he needs to reach an overall QB1 ceiling. Right now, he's going ahead of Jaden Daniels on Underdog, barely. I think that is probably wrong, just because I think that the ceilings on both of them, given the rushing difference, even if Maye runs a lot, it is all scrambles, and it's not a lot of runs inside the 5-yard line. So I think that Daniels has a significantly higher ceiling, and I'd be much more willing to pay for him rather than Maye.
Agreed there. I thought Drake Maye was one of the easiest clicks on the board last year where he was going. This year, I've had a tougher time getting to him. I do love A.J. Brown, and we'll get to that wide receiver room. But let's go to the running backs here first, because this is a split that, man, it was talked about going into last season, throughout all of last season, into the postseason, and then has followed up again into this offseason. It's a really interesting one and really tricky depending on kind of like how you break down the splits between Ramondre Stevenson and TreVeyon Henderson. So I was very curious where we came in projection wise against Gretch, and are actually a little bit different here. We have Ramondre Stevenson projected as the RB1 in carries at 181. Gretch is at 162. And then Gretch is ahead on TreVeyon Henderson in terms of his carries to Ramondre. He's at 190. We're at 165. So again, kind of like the inverse here on the carry projection. In terms of target projection, we're at 38 on TreVeyon Henderson. Gretch is at 42. We're at 36 on Ramondre, and Gretch is at 37. So more even there. It's more kind of just the base carry projection that is a bit different. And I mentioned like the different segments of the season. Last year, pre-injury for Ramondre, he had 83 carries, and TreVeyon had 53 carries in 8 games. Post-injury, which is like when Ramondre came back to the end of the regular season, which was 6 games, Ramondre had 47 carries, TreVeyon 80 carries. And then, of course, in the playoffs, Ramondre ran away a little bit with 58 carries and TreVeyon 30 carries. So, man, this is really tough. I honestly don't have a super strong lean. I think you could probably sell yourself either way. So, Gretch, curious your thoughts here, just having Travion ahead and base carries and the way you're expecting it to play out this season.
Man, this is one of the hardest backfields to figure out. One of the things is there doesn't really seem to be a real number 3 presence here, so we can start there. The round 7 guy Miller from Bama is fast, but he seems really limited. They still have Terrell Jennings and I don't know who else is going to matter here. My perception on last year is there were a couple flips, that it wasn't just that Ramondre Stevenson was better. I think we kind of forget that through week 13, this dude had a 3.2 yards per carry with a fumbling issue. And then in the final 4 weeks of the regular season, he had a 9.6. That's a real number, 3.2 yards per carry. And then he had a 9.6 yards per carry in the final 4 games, 6 total touchdowns. Some of that came on because of when Henderson got his concussion. I think it was week 16. And then they rode that hot hand into the postseason naturally because Stevenson was absolutely smashing. He had a good playoff run as a receiver. He really struggled as a runner late in the conference championship and in the Super Bowl. I'm not saying that Stevenson's a bad player, trying to talk anyone off that. I think he's one of these backs that does everything. I do think his profile gets romanticized a bit when people focus their ire on Henderson's flaws, which were apparent as a rookie. Henderson's issues were clear, but I do think Stevenson's mostly a jag, just a guy. That may be enough if Henderson's not better, but I do think Henderson does clearly still have the bigger profile ceiling. But his ADP is really steep. I think I could make the case that you could pay for a cheaper anti-fragile bet there, where he had a really great profile in college, this really breakout player. He was the only running back in the NFL with 450-plus yard runs last year. There's some really good peripherals. He had a really high missed tackles forced per catch. So Ramondre Stevenson, one of the fascinating things about his profile is he had an awesome receiving profile last year. He ends up second in the NFL in air yards behind only Christian McCaffrey, which is, not something I would have ever guessed in a million years would have been what Ramondre Stevenson would have done last year. I think that role was actually designed for Travion Henderson. They talked about him in the pass game all offseason. There was actually a quote from McDaniel in the postseason about how Stevenson's pass blocking allowed him to make an impact in the pass game. And Henderson notoriously was horrible in the pass blocking game. There were other rookies that were bad too. So, there's a whole thing about how the defensive fronts did a lot of really interesting stuff. We've talked about it a couple times. And I think some of the rookies had a harder time in pass protection as a result, that they were seeing very different things than they were seeing in college. And so maybe that can actually develop for Henderson. He was supposed to be a good pass protector coming out of college, a willing pass protector. So anyway, it's interesting to me that Travion Henderson got 10.6 attempts per game to 9.3 for Ramondre last year. You talked about how it changed over the year, but he also played more games. He had 50 more carries as a rookie, 180 to 130. I don't think a lot of people would think that. I think they would think that was flipped, that Ramondre Stevenson had 50 more carries. Henderson got talked about a lot for only having 4 snaps in the conference championship. And he did, but he also had 25-plus snaps in each of the other 3 playoff games, including the Super Bowl. They went right back to playing him a meaningful amount in the Super Bowl. He wasn't good in the playoffs necessarily, and there are real issues with his profile going forward. He did have a higher targets per out run during the season as well. I think there was early intent to get him the ball in the pass game, but again, he struggled in pass pro. And then you had that quote from McDaniels. It was during the postseason. I actually found the quote here. Ability in pass pro allowed him to play a role as a pass catcher was the direct way he said that. And then Ramondre was great as a receiver because he got all those air yards. He caught a couple long ones. He has a massive 9.3 yards per target, which is an absurd number for Ramondre Stevenson to have in a veteran season. It's not going to be sustainable. I didn't project that as what Ramondre Stevenson's going to do as a pass catcher this year. But also, when you're making those plays vertically, we've talked about how teams were using the running backs vertically a little bit more last year. Stevenson's one of the best examples of it. And when you're making those plays, you're going to get those opportunities more. I think he earned it. I think the biggest thing that happened late in the year, well, along with Henderson having issues, but for a stretch there, I think when Henderson was hitting the long runs, they were willing to deal with the issues just to get him as the higher, they thought his explosiveness was worth getting on the field. And then I think when Stevenson flipped his efficiency, his ball in hand efficiency flipped, again, through week 13, 3.2 yards per carry. He had still done some stuff in the pass game, but he was struggling as a runner. And then as soon as he flipped it, then you don't have to deal with the mistakes from Henderson in pass protection and that stuff. You just ride Stevenson. In terms of going forward, I don't know how predictive that is of 2026. This is where I was talking about how I think this is a team both in their pass catchers how it was balanced and there was some rotational stuff throughout the year. This is one of those teams I think with the 18-game season is like, we're going to take it as it comes. We see depth and we see rotational stuff, and we're going to take it as it comes. I think that things changed throughout the year in their backfield. Stevenson ended the season clearly dominant. A lot of the numbers I'm giving about like the full season, like Travion having 50 more rush attempts, is me just trying to emphasize that that wasn't the whole season, right? Like it came in ebbs and flows, and I think that's how 2026 projects as well. And so then you have to kind of talk about profile bets. Like, is Stevenson's profile the one you want to bet on because you don't think Henderson can correct the mistakes? Or if Henderson corrects the mistakes, does he have enough efficiency upside to then be the guy who sticks on the field, at that point?
It's definitely fair questions. And right now in Underdog, we only have a 4-spot gap in ranking between Travion and Ramondre. We do have Travion ahead, but in terms of ADP, they're going 24 spots apart. So obviously we are suggesting to draft Ramondre with that rank and kind of fade Travion. And I am a little bit concerned because, I was like looking through this stuff and I was like, man, did Ramondre just go on like a playoff heater kind of thing? And it's hard not to extrapolate the playoff stuff because those are the highest leverage games. And you want to say, okay, like if they're playing Ramondre, way more than Travion, he's getting way more touches in the playoffs. So doesn't that mean they trust him more and will lean on him more in the next season? But I agree. And I was also a little bit surprised that Ramondre is 28 years old. I honestly thought he was a little bit younger than that. So Jack, I'm a little bit concerned because I have been taking a lot of Ramondre, and the Travion profile is very explosive, and he's much younger bet, 23 years old there. He was shown to be an explosive NFL player last year. So it's a tough position here, but I'm honestly a little bit swayed. I'm curious your thoughts on this split here.
Yeah, I think Gretch made a lot of really good points, and I'm not opposed to tightening the gap after hearing what he had to say. I think that contextualizing that conference championship game and maybe weighing it less than the other 3 games makes sense. As he said, I was kind of looking at the fact that Ramondre outcarried Henderson 58-30 in the 4 playoff games, but if you throw out that snow game, which is obviously just a super unique environment, it was only 33-27 in favor of Ramondre. And I think that keeping the long view, I felt all offseason that Henderson's kind of a scary fade, but I think that the fact that they went so hard toward Ramondre in the high leverage situations has made me feel okay about it. But it certainly is a scary fade. I do think that regardless of how this backfield shakes out, I don't think there's a world in which Ramondre goes away. And I mean, even last year through the fumble issues, they kind of stuck with him. I mean, he had 7 fumbles in 2024. He had 3 in a 3-week stretch, including 2 in a single game early last season, and they kept going back to him. He led the team in carries the week after he had 2 fumbles. He had 13 carries the week after he fumbled again in week 5. It wasn't like he was dominating carries, but the coach speak throughout that stretch was positive despite an ongoing fumble issue. And then we saw him take over the backfield again in the playoffs after Travion had been dominating carries in weeks 13 through 18, including week 17 and 18 post concussion for Travion. So I don't really think that there's a world in which Ramondre goes away. And I mean, maybe it kind of goes the way of like a Kenneth Walker and Ramondre Stevenson situation. Although I do think that given the profile Henderson had coming out of Ohio State, he probably has more pass catching upside than Walker, just keeping the long view because that was kind of his calling card coming out of college. It's certainly interesting to think through. And after hearing Gretch talk, I would be open to moving it a little bit closer. But I certainly don't think Ramondre is going away. But whether we should have him leading the team in carries is a different question. Although I will say we do have the ceiling case tilted pretty hard in Henderson's favor, despite having fewer carries on base right now, which maybe will change after the show. We do have Henderson with quite a bit higher of a ceiling, which I think is pretty indisputable.
I'll cop, by the way, to my split being heavily ADP based, right? Like, it's just like I didn't really know how to space it, but I was like, yeah, I mean, Travion's going higher, and I don't want my projections to be like way too low on Travion and Henderson, so I'm just gonna like, it's a little bit more of some of the ceiling stuff you just said. Is like, I think if things go well, you're seeing Henderson make year 2 improvements, and you're seeing him potentially take more work later in the year.
I think probably in redraft too. I think probably in redraft too, like there's a much stronger case for Travion being like an obvious weekly start every single week, whereas Ramondre, it might be a little bit tougher to get there. Whereas, you know, again, in best ball, that line is a little bit blurred. I do think, like Jack said, though, it's not like Ramondre is going away, and I do think the pass protection role is going to continue to lean into Ramondre. It was just so heavily in his favor last year. He had 112 pass blocking snaps. Meanwhile, Travion only had 48. And, you know, in terms of like just like total snaps played, it was very similar across the board. So they very clearly favored Ramondre in that category. And I don't necessarily, I don't know. I'm a little skeptical of that flipping, you know, Travion's favor in year two, even though he was profiled as an above average pass protector coming out of college. Okay, let's go to the wide receiver room. AJ Brown brought in this offseason in his age 29 season after a much maligned last year in Philadelphia, and some funny parallels to his last season in Tennessee, and then getting shipped to the Eagles. Last year had a pretty noticeable dip in yards per target, down to 8.3. That was his lowest in his career, also which aligns perfectly with his last year in Tennessee, which was also 8.3 yards per target. And then he went up to 10.3 the following year in Philly in his first season, which was the best season of his career. And then just kind of throwing out, you know, just like numbers, just like vibes based on AJ Brown. He feels like a vindictive enough, you know, wide receiver one to kind of have the mentality to change teams and really want to stick it to his former team. So I'm loving the AJ Brown profile this year. And, you know, he's going in kind of mid round too, which I think is a great pick. In terms of projections, though, we're even quite a bit behind where Gretch is here. We're at 118 targets. Gretch is at 142. So heavily leaning into alpha AJ Brown season, which again, I love to see. This pass catching group last year was honestly pretty confusing because the Steph Diggs like per route numbers were really strong, but he just never really consolidated routes in a meaningful enough way to have a super consistent, you know, week in and week out role. And then it was just really muddled behind them with Matt Collins, Kayshon Boutte, Demario Douglas, and Kyle Williams. And now they bring in AJ Brown and Dobbs and only lose Steph Diggs. So I think it's a lot of bodies kind of after AJ Brown. And I guess maybe you could pencil in Romeo Dobbs as a wide receiver too there. But I do think kind of all signs point to alpha AJ Brown season. And Gretch, yeah, you come in 24 targets ahead of us, which is a very meaningful gap. How are you viewing this move for AJ Brown to New England?
I was curious at where we'd come in here. I guess I'm more concerned about how much higher I am than you guys on Romeo Dobbs, because that was one where I was like, am I pushing this button too far? I think AJ Brown is way better than everyone else in this passing game. I think there are not a lot of true superstars. AJ Brown had a 2.06 yards per out run in a clear down year last year. When we did the Vikings, I talked about how Justin Jefferson at 1.88 was the first time he was below 2.5 to start his career after 5 straight years to start his career. Brown was running a 6 straight 2.5 plus yards per out run streak. He had been at 2.99 just in 2024 before his down year, which was still over 2, which is some guy's career season, by the way. And he left plays on the field with drops. He didn't care. He was like visibly, this is like a very much a film take, but as somebody who watches the game and writes about him every week, he visibly was not trying for a long time. And then about like halfway through the year, he was like, well, I mean, I still want stats, and so now I'm going to start trying. And then he's like started producing. Like, to me, this is still a player that is a consistent problem to defend, down after down at all depths, before and after the catch point. The yak stuff is still really good. This idea of that I've talked about a little bit with some other receivers of making tough stuff look easy has been like the strength of AJ Brown's throughout his career. I think it gets missed by most casual observers, but it's why he's so good at the deep ball. He has late hands every time, so like the cornerback can't swipe on him and stuff. And that's caused some of the drops, and they see the drop and they're like, oh, he's bad. It's like, yeah, because he flashed his hands so late, and then he's not like really concentrating enough. I'm not saying he's not trying, but it's like it's a lack of concentration. I think there's going to be another level from AJ Brown. He's still only 29. The stuff about the knee was a real concern for the Rams, who dropped out of trying to acquire him, but they seemed to be more concerned about less about 2026 than like 2 to 3 years. And the Pats still gave up a ton to get him, significantly more than the Bills gave up to get DJ Moore, for example. Like, these are both guys that I've always really liked. Moore's a little harder for me to get to. AJ Brown is one, the price the Pats paid, they're clearly not concerned about it. I'll also say, once upon a time, we talked about the number one wide receiver in Josh McDaniels' offenses as a goldmine. You go back to when he was the Rams head coach a long, long time ago. Huge Brandon Marshall season followed by a huge Brandon Lloyd season. The Broncos. That's what I said.
The Broncos, yeah.
Devontae Adams recently just had 2 massive seasons for the Raiders under McDaniels, 180, then 175 targets. Diggs last year went on the field. He had his routes limited, but we talked about how the per route run was awesome. Jacoby Myers really consolidated in 2021. Edelman, Gronk, some of those guys have had some big years for him in New England as well. Again, I just think this is a player that's incredible. You talked about how his yards per target was down. His yak per reception was a career low, still okay. One of the things he's always been able to give you is a high ADOT plus yak, which those are typically inversely correlated. That's part of why his yards per target was down. The yak was not there. Again, 8.4 yards per target or 8.3 or whatever the number you gave. That's not terrible for other guys. That Romeo Doubs has been improving his yards per target the last couple years, and his 2 good years, the last 2 years, are right in that range. His 2 years prior were like 7, right? That's when Romeo Doubs' yards per target couldn't be what A.J. Brown is in a bad year. Another note I want to mention is the routes. We were just talking about this with the Kincaid thing. His first 2 years in Philly, he was over 575 routes per PFS numbers. Last year, 487 as they went so run heavy. That third year in between there, he missed some time, was also sub 500. So over the last couple of years, that's going to impact his final tallies as far as the receptions, the yardage, all of that. I think he's in line to run 550 plus routes again. I think he's in line to have that per route run rate rise again. As we talk about the other secondary receivers here, I'll explain a little bit more about why I don't think any of those guys are really going to contend with Brown, but I think this is like a clear alpha. I think it's the kind of guy Josh McDaniels builds offenses around. I think he's a perfect fit for Drake Maye. He's a really good vertical wide receiver, and Drake Maye threw those balls so well last year that you're talking about like Kayshon Boutte and Demario Douglas, despite really low targets per route. When the ball got out to them, their yards per target was like elite. They had these long catches. AJ Brown is going to step in here and just be, unless he's not there health-wise, I think he's going to be the clear alpha.
Yeah, he's been one of my favorite targets in the second round of draft so far this season. I really do love the upside case for AJ Brown. Agree, just with kind of best quarterback play of his career coming over here with Drake Maye. And I do want to get to the secondary receivers though. Romeo Doubs we project as wide receiver 2 here at 72 targets, but Gretch is a little bit higher there at 92. And Jack, I see this as more of like a lateral move for Romeo Doubs. Last year, Kayshon Boutte led the Patriots with a 71% route share. I've hit on Diggs a couple times. He was only at 68%. And Doubs for the Packers was mostly in like the low 70s over the last few seasons. So I don't necessarily think like the role is going to be expanded a lot here. And then you play with more of like an alpha target earner and AJ Brown. And I do kind of like wonder a little bit about the upside for Doubs. Again, it just seems more like a lateral move, but we are a little bit behind market on him, both in best ball and now kind of behind Gretch's target numbers. So curious your thoughts on Dobbs's change here over to the Pats.
Yeah, I think Dobbs is a solid player. They gave him 4 years for $68 million. They seem to like him. His yards per target has increased in every season of his career. My real question with Dobbs is just what the routes numbers are going to be like you said, because they were so rotation heavy last year to the point where Stephon Diggs never even played more than 68.7% of snaps. And now they have AJ Brown, who I think we all agree is going to be in an every down role. Are they just suddenly going to abandon this relatively deep wide receiver room that they seem to like using last year in favor of getting Romeo Doubs on the field in an every down role? I'm not super convinced. I mean, Matt Collins is a really good blocker. Kayshon Boutte had, I think, 12 yards per target last year on a 17 ADOT, 16.7 yards per reception. I think that they like him as a deep threat. Pop Douglas. They still have Kyle Williams they just drafted in the 3rd round. So there's just so many names here. And the fact that they used such a heavy rotation last year makes me think that Dobbs probably isn't going to be in an every down role. So when you've got AJ Brown on the field for every snap, and then you've got just a handful of wide receivers basically competing for 1 or 2 wide receiver spots, it's nothing to do with Dobbs as a talent. I think that they like him. It's just that I'm not concerned that the routes are going to be there on a weekly basis to be a fantasy viable option.
Gretch, do you think we're over indexing like how much they rotated the wide receivers last year? Like, do you think there's a pretty good chance it'll condense on Dobbs as the wide receiver 2 alongside AJ Brown, or I guess kind of what's your viewpoint on how this wide receiver room shakes out, just because it was one last year where it's like, man, why is Diggs not consolidating more, or I don't know, it's just a little odd of a situation, and I don't want to get caught in the trap of again just like having a one season sample size and saying, oh, that's how they're going to play it again this year. But it is a very crowded wide receiver room with, I think, a decent amount of deserving players, so it is a little bit tricky in that aspect.
Well, I think maybe where I don't have a clear answer. That's definitely the way I projected it, is it's going to go that way. I think where we disagree maybe, or the way that I'm seeing it, is I don't know that those guys were great last year. I think that was actually maybe a limitation for the offense. Like, one of the notes I had is Mac Hollins was 32 last year. He turned 32 in September. He's going to turn 33 going into this year, and played a ton. And then after he was injured, he stepped back into a role in 2 postseason games where he immediately earned 10 targets. And I talked about how, like, basically 5 targets a game was leading the team in the postseason. The fact that Mac Hollins returning right off injury is into a key postseason role speaks to some broader concerns, I think. Kayshon Boutte was efficient, was second on the team in wide receiver routes, but he was 12.3% targets per route. I think he's a good player of the ball, but I don't think he created the separation that they needed. Demario Douglas, very limited routes, 222. Strong yards per route run on those limited routes, but I think they felt like they needed to use him situationally for one reason or another. I do think those 2 guys are decent role players. I think they'll be likely in the rotation this year, Boutte and Douglas. I think Hollins is the one at age 33 that maybe gets phased out a little. I do agree that teams seem to really like him for his blocking and some of that stuff. But like Kyle Williams, they wanted to get a lot out of him. 5-year college player. He only earned 178 routes. He's supposed to be more experienced at that point, and still had an 11.8% targets per route, even with like rotational usage where sometimes that can spike. Day 2 capital in a weak receiving room. Not a good long-term look there. They've been talking the whole offseason about how he needs to get stronger. He's lifting, all this stuff. It's like, dude's like already 24. Like, I'm not loving that they're like, he's not strong enough. Like, we need him to lift weights. That's not ideal. I don't know what's up with Diggs. He was coming off an ACL. I mean, that's part of the reason the routes were a little bit potentially more rotational. I don't know why he wasn't used a little bit more, but I do think part of it was they were concerned about him. When I wrote up my like postseason recap that I call field tippers, I had a quote in my writing that I just reviewed recently that said they had such weak options. The top target and maybe the second target might not even be on the roster for next year. And so maybe I'm over-indexing to my own like prediction that they went out and acquired these guys. But when I went through the projections and I read that, I was like, yeah, they were kind of crappy last year. And then they went out and acquired these 2 guys. And I think even Dobbs, who I don't think is incredible, is, to me, he's solid. He's good at what he does. He's an adequate number 2. His targets per route and run always in the number 2 range, about 20% or just below. The after the target efficiency has improved from the poor first couple of years. As you noted, after the target efficiency, like yards per target, those things, it's gotten better each year. I think that's a credit to him that I do think he's gotten better. He used to have some odd plays where he just left stuff out on the field. I think he's cleaned some of that up. I think they went and got him because he's more stable, even as a number 2. And then they go get AJ Brown, who's, I think going to be the pretty clear number 1. Obviously, I just shared that. But I thought there was a lot of room for those 2 to consolidate when I started my projection and went through it. I don't love that I'm basically cutting the target rate from last year for everyone else, because I still have all the guys that are on the team last year, basically, right? And I'm just moving them all down the list. But that's kind of the way it looks to me.
Yeah, that's certainly fair. And again, something I am a little bit worried about, just kind of leaning too much into the splits from last year. But, they ended up making the Super Bowl and we're a very successful offense throughout the season. So if it's like a little bit of a, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But, they do bring in two new pieces to the wide receiver room as well. So a little bit of like, I think, conflicting information there. But yeah, we are, essentially just higher on the Mac Hollins, Kayshon Boutte, Demario Douglas target shares by quite a bit compared to AJ Brown and Romeo Dobbs compared to Gretch. So that might be a spot we want to look at and condense a little bit on those top 2. And AJ Brown especially is someone I want to remain as have him being a target for us in drafts this season. Okay, let's go to the tight ends here, led by Hunter Henry in this tight end room. They lose Austin Hooper to the Falcons this offseason. They did sign Julian Hill, but he has suffered an injury that is going to cause him to miss this whole upcoming season. So a bit of a ding there already to the tight end room. And then they draft Eli Raridan out of Notre Dame in the 3rd round this season, 95th overall. But Hunter Henry, pretty solid last year, tight end 12 on the season, currently going as a tight end 19 on Underdog. We have him as a little bit of a value here at tight end 16. In terms of inputs, we're at 62 and a half targets on Hunter Henry. Gretch is at 79 there. In terms of yards per target, we're at closer to 7.9. Gretch at 7.5 there. So we're a little bit lighter on the volume, but a little bit hotter on the efficiency, and also a little bit hotter on his touchdowns, despite being like 16 targets behind there. So I think, Hunter Henry, not like the sexiest tight end target this year, but probably going to have some value in this offense. Jack, any thoughts on this Patriots tight end room?
Yeah, he keeps getting targets, Hunter Henry. He's been at least a 19% target per hour on 3 straight seasons. I think that with the improved wide receiver room that we've been talking about, we're expecting that to take a hit and him to take a little bit of a backseat. But even with that expectation, we're still ahead of his underdog ADP. We're basically at his DraftKings ADP. But yeah, I think that they drafted Raridon largely for the future. Hunter Henry is an unrestricted free agent after this year. I know that Raridon has a lot of fans as a prospect, and I think long-term that makes sense. I do think that this year it's still likely Hunter Henry's job, and he's proven over the past few years that he's just a consistent, dependable target earner.
Led the team in targets in Maye's rookie year in 2024, was second last year behind only Diggs in 2025. Low-end tight end 1 both years. Turns 32 in December. It's not necessarily too old at tight end. It's a decent bet to accumulate. Like I'm pushing him down because I think they have way better number 1 and number 2 receivers, like what you guys are talking about. But it's very solid, 1.67 yards per out run last year. And then the one little note on him, I do think he has a solid connection with Drake Maye, just with all that target. I think there's something real there, like with all that target volume over the first 2 years, like Jack was talking about. So yeah, I think he's a palatable tight end 19 ADP for a guy that's probably going to be out there quite a bit. He's probably not a huge ceiling play, but I mean, it's fine.
Yeah, pretty much my thoughts there. Exactly. All right, let's head to one of the most interesting teams in the league to project this year, and that's the Miami Dolphins. Almost a complete overhaul here. Coaching staff comes in. We have Jeff Hafley here coming from the Packers over to be the head coach. Bobby Slowick is going to be the offensive coordinator and play caller here. Bobby Slowick was on the Dolphins coaching staff last year, though. He was the pass game coordinator, which I honestly did not realize before researching this. So I guess a little bit of continuity there. You have Bobby Slowick staying in the building, but in terms of team level projections here, we are at 59.2 plays per game. Gretch is at 59.6. We're at a 55.6% pass rate. Gretch at 55% there. So pretty much in alignment for the most part on the team level stuff. And the Dolphins, we have projected for the least plays per game or the fewest plays per game in the NFL this season, as well as the second lowest pass rate at 55.5%. So not the best fantasy environment here overall. But yeah, I mean, just tons of overhaul here. Malik Willis, the starting quarterback, a wide receiver room unlike anything we've ever seen here. Just a lot of interesting stuff going on. I do want to mention their defensive coordinator, Sean Duggan, was hired, and I saw him play high school football. He's a couple years older than me, and was on a defensive back / linebacker when I was in high school. So shout out Sean Duggan. Excited to see what he can do in the league here, but. Man, I don't know. This is a wild team setup here, Jack. Here, what are your thoughts here on the Dolphins? And this is a team that's like kind of throw your hands up, and man, I don't really know how it's going to go. But Bobby Slowick gets another shot here as offensive coordinator. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have an idea of how it's going to go. I think it's going to go pretty poorly. I mean, it's just, but Malik Willis was fun last year, but it's just not a very interesting team, starting with the coaching staff, really. I mean, Bobby Slowick was basically chased out of town in Houston. The Texans actually were worse in EPA per play rank last year than they were under Slowick in 2023 or 2024, although they did play 3 Davis Mills games last year that lowered the EPA per play. But it's not like they were completely disastrous, but I think that given how strong Stroud's career started off, it was disappointing and makes sense that he was chased out. Jeff Hafley, the head coach, was the defensive coordinator for the Packers. The Packers defense completely fell apart once Micah Parsons went down, and before that, before Hafley was the Packers DC, he went 500 as Boston College's head coach. I think you can expect this team to be really run heavy simply because of the quarterback, and likely also pretty slow, which also goes back to how bad they are as well as the quarterback. The Packers were really, really slow under Willis, and they had really high motion rates in those games as well. I think LaFleur maybe was really trying to lock in whenever he had Malik Willis at quarterback, because the motion rates were like above 80% anytime Willis was the quarterback, and the pace was really, really slow as a result. Except for that Ravens game where they got blown out and had to be a negative game script. I think that this is basically a question of how low can you go on the pass rate for a team that is not going to win more than maybe 5 games. Willis has double-digit scramble and sack rates in his career, 12% or higher on both scramble and sack rates. He's going to have a lot of designed runs, so it's just going to be really ugly, I think, from a play volume standpoint and a pass rate standpoint.
I echo all that. Some fun little numbers on it. Malik Willis has only made 6 starts this in his career. He has thrown no more than 23 passes in a game in those 6 starts, which for people who don't immediately know how low that is, if he averaged 23 per game, the Dolphins would come in under 400 pass attempts. Would be a record-breaking low number. He's only thrown 20-plus passes twice. Like, being in the low 20s on an average basis is extremely low pass volume. Now, this was with some good offenses and some good teams where, like, when Green Bay tried to win with him, they would do a really run-heavy offense, as Jack just detailed. They're going to have to throw more because of game script at times, although Jeff Hafley came right out and said, when teams know we're going to run the ball, we're still going to run it well. Like, he wants their core to be running the ball. He went into liking the Shanahan tree offenses and wanted to be under center and running and then play pass off of that, tying the run to the pass game. I do want to shout out Hafley for this quote, which was, again, I love when they say the things that we've talked about. We talked about how defenses want to take away explosives this offseason. He said, and as a defensive guy, I want an offensive coordinator that's going to hunt explosives because everything I do in every single situation on defense is to eliminate explosives. Just a good note from, like, that's the way the defenses are thinking right now. That's the way Jeff Hafley is thinking about his new team. He wants to eliminate explosives from the other side, which is, I mean, not really relevant to this projection. But this is, yeah, everything Jack said about it's going to be a very slow pace. They're going to do a lot of motion. They're going to, all the Shanahan offenses are like that. And Hafley's, wanted to run that way, his offense that way, and brought in Slowick to do that. Malik Willis is going to have an incredibly high scramble rate for his career is 13.4%. It was 19.1% last year. There's just 47 dropbacks. He has just 209 for his career. We have a very small sample, but if you go back to college, his scramble rate was 14.6%, very high. His sack rate last year was a career best 6.4% in a good offense where they're running effectively and throwing off of that. It's 12% for his career. In college, it was a really high 8.9% for a collegiate, for a future NFL player, especially because he was at Liberty to take sacks on 9% of dropbacks. So this is a guy who takes a lot of sacks. So you have this other issue as well. When they do drop back, he's going to scramble a lot. He's going to take a lot of sacks. We talked about this with Justin Fields a lot last year. The percentage of called passes, dropbacks that turn into pass attempts. Fields was like, I remember on these pods with Leone emphasizing Fields is in another planet. Like almost 30% of his dropbacks end up not being pass attempts. And like even any other mobile quarterbacks aren't in those ranges. Malik Willis is in that range. He's like the only other dude that's in that range. If you take his career scramble rate and career sack rate, you're over 25% of his dropbacks are not becoming pass attempts. And they're going to call passes at an incredibly low rate. And they're going to lose, so they're not going to get the ball enough, and they're going to play slow. They're going to run an incredibly low number of plays. I projected them for the fewest called passes, and then they're going to convert the fewest called passes into actual pass attempts. It's not fun for fantasy in this offense. It gets very, very grim fast. I didn't know how it was going to look. I'm amazed at how close our projections look, but I love that as you guys put in the receiver names in the comparison tool, you just added a bunch of other names. Yeah. I just have so many random names. It's great.
It's truly like an unprecedented team, I think, to project because you have this dynamic with Willis at quarterback, and you do kind of have to extrapolate the small sample that we've seen of him as a starter to, okay, how is this going to look over a full season? Can he scramble almost 14% of the time? I don't know. We've kind of dialed him back closer to like 10%, which is just kind of like the highest we've given to a quarterback scramble rate for a full season at this point. Similar with like Jaden Daniels and Drake Maye, who, you know, Jaden Daniels
I did him at 12.
Yeah, which could be fair, and honestly, like we could end up being light Malik Willis rushing output. That is the spot we are a little bit behind you, Gretch. We're at 126 rush attempts. You're at 139. We are pretty even in terms of the yardage, and actually even a little bit ahead of you on rush TDs. But in terms of like the rush volume, like I think this is probably the most muted we could get. You know, like I could see us coming up on the scramble rate even. And then we have him projected for about 3 designed rush attempts per game, and in his 3 starts with the Packers over the last couple of years, he's had exactly 3 designed rush attempts in every game, which I found interesting. But I mean, yeah, he's just been a prolific runner too. You know, had 174 rushing yards in the 3 starts with the Packers over the few years. So it's not even that he's just scrambling and running a lot, but like he is an absolutely elite runner and has displayed that at the NFL level. So man, it could get pretty nutty here for fantasy, but the lack of like passing stats contribution is, I think, really going to be the kicker here, because we average out for like 440 pass attempts between the two of us, which and around 3,000 yards, which is just an insanely low number for a full season projection for a quarterback.
When I was about to jump in there, I was going to share a note I had that I wrote. The rushing projection could really be pretty nutty if I was inclined to push the efficiency, and then you wound up using that exact term. I didn't push the efficiency necessarily, but I think if you really wanted to push it, so it gets to this. That's what I was struggling with, is like you were just talking about. He's been really efficient as a rusher. But I'm like, how much of that is the Packers offense and the design and the players around him and all of those things? How much of that is just purely his athleticism and what have you? I mean, I think he's a good football player, and he's a good ball in hand player, in addition to being able to throw. And his per dropback passing has been really efficient. I think that gets back to the Green Bay offense. When we did the Green Bay show, I talked about how Jordan Love's efficiency really, really good. And I don't think I gave Jordan Love enough credit on that. So I was, kind of coming at his supporters. I do want to note he's good at throwing the deep stuff. And Willis has shown that too. Getting back to Hafley's quote, teams are trying to take away that stuff. And in that Green Bay offense, both Love and Willis, yes, they were running a lot to set up shot plays, but they both threw the shot plays effectively. Like, to go hunt deep plays and make those passes is impressive. If Willis can bring that over, yeah, that's, obviously great. If they're run heavy and they're able to then have the explosive pass plays off of that, maybe that is a skill that he has. We have such a small sample on Malik Willis that it is really, really difficult to know, even the little things like the rush efficiency that you described, how much we really want to push that. I will note, very similar to the Cardinals. Cardinals, we talked about being a really bad team that had the hardest schedule in the NFL. This team's second hardest schedule in the NFL by look ahead lines. One more reason to be like, yeah, this is not going to go well. There might be some optimism in some of the things, and maybe Malik Willis looks a lot better than, there's ways you can certainly see him playing a good season this year, but that's probably also part of why they're going the direction they are, is they knew that their schedule was going to be difficult this year. They know the divisions they're going to play and where they're at, and it's just a full rebuild for them and the Cardinals. It's kind of a weird thing, because usually you get, the last place teams playing a little bit of an easier schedule. We have 2 teams this year that are like in clear rebuilds and play the 2 hardest schedules. I think last year, like, the Chiefs had the hardest schedule because they were playing a first place schedule. These teams are bad, and they're leaning into it, and they're going to play a bunch of teams better than them, and they might just be, well, maybe not the Cardinals, but the Dolphins might just not be relevant for fantasy football.
I'll add that on a limited sample, it was only around 140 plays over the past 2 years with the Packers. Willis is by far number 1 among all quarterbacks in EPA per play if you lower the sample size enough in terms of snaps. And then on top of that, it's interesting that before free agency, there was some talk that he could get $30+ million, that teams are really buying it. He only ended up getting around $22.5 million for 3 years. I don't know if a pre-existing relationship with the Dolphins GM and Jeff Hafley played into that at all. But it didn't seem like the NFL ended up buying into the limited sample size with Willis as much as we were maybe led to believe entering free agency, which I think is interesting to think about as it pertains to projecting Willis's actual talent level as a passer, given that we have such a limited sample that the league didn't seem to totally buy it.
Great point.
Yeah, and I think Malik Willis, just on like a macro scale, he does kind of limit what your offense can do, or at least I guess perceive to limit how your offense can function. Just given the rushing nature that has been designed for him in the Packers the last couple of years, because it was an absolute like U-turn from where the Packers were at certain points. Are like, oh, Malik Willis quarterback, well, we're going to run it 40, 50 times a game, and really didn't lean into the pass stuff at all. But let's go, or I guess we should talk about the fantasy value ultimately here, because we talked about the rushing floor that he'll provide. He's going as the QB 21 right now in Underdog. We're at QB 20, so a little bit, about 8 spots ahead of ADP on him, and I think the floor here is extremely strong. And if the passing can come along at all, like, he could, I think, be a bottom end QB1. I don't really think the upside is there necessarily just with this pass catcher core, but has he been a target for you guys and I guess best ball and redraft to this point?
I have not been intrigued. Then when I got through the projection, I got a little bit more, like, I could see it a little bit more because the rushing could drive it so much. The tricky part is the touchdowns, like, overall in the offense. And I talked about this with the Pats, how they're projected a lot lower. I mean, you guys have more rushing TDs for him. I ended up with a little bit more on the Devon Achane rushing TD side and trying to figure out how to hit those rates. It might be the case that Willis will wind up with more rushing TDs than Achane, and I think that would be very positive. And then if his rushing yards per carry is more in the range of where you guys are at, I mean, he goes late enough that there's like legitimate rushing potential here. It's just with rushing QBs, I always think you do need a floor of passing. Like, I had a hard time with Fields last year, even though I loved his rushing potential, because I thought that Jets offense was going to have a hard time with the passing. There's just no weapons. He at least had Garrett Wilson. Malik Willis has nobody. When you go through a projection, you're like, who am I projecting anything for? The rookies might develop like as the season goes on. This is another one of those teams that's going to be different throughout the 18 weeks, as we've talked about. Some of these teams looking at it from a different perspective. I think they're going to have some veterans playing early and some rookies playing late, and a lot of different things happening. But I don't know that he has a lot of playmakers on the other side of these throws to have the passing efficiency that he had in Green Bay. I mean, he had Christian Watson and Jaden Reed and these dudes making plays for him. It's tricky for the passing to even be like a floor for him to be a low-end QB1. This really pushes the limit of that, Konami code quarterback.
100%. All right, let's go to the running back room. Devon Achane remains in this backfield. He has, going through this, he did undergo offseason shoulder surgery, so he was not a part of minicamp, which I thought was interesting. He missed the last game of the season last year and then had, a quote unquote like cleanup procedure, essentially expected to be fine for training camp, but offseason surgery always like piques my interest there a little bit. And then he's really thrived over the last couple of seasons, obviously in the pass catching department. When you bring in a quarterback like Malik Willis, that theoretically saps that a bit. And so Gretch's target projection on Devon Achane was one I was really curious about. And we're almost identical there. We're at 64.3 targets on Achane. Gretch is at 65. In terms of rush attempts, we're at 211 and Gretch is at 222 there. So honestly, Achane has been one of the tougher guys for us to nail down, just because it is such a big flip in terms of like the offensive scheme and the quarterback play here. And so the fact that we're pretty aligned makes me feel a little bit better on the surface level here. But Jack, this backfield led by Achane, they also have Jalen Wright and Ollie Gordon here rounding out the room. What are your thoughts on the Dolphins backfield heading into the 2026 season?
Yeah, I'll start with the less relevant players, because I think it's funny that both Gretch and us both projected Jalen Wright and Ollie Gordon for the exact same number of carries as each other and targets as each other, basically just throwing our arms up and saying we don't know who the RB2 is.
Fun fact, they both had 70 carries and 9 targets last year. They had the same number of carries and targets, although Wright only played 10 games and Gordon played 17. But yeah, we're doing the same thing for this year. It's funny.
I do lean Wright a little bit there because he missed the first 6 games, and then it's Ollie Gordon had a ton of hype coming out of training camp, and then it kind of seemed like he fumbled his opportunity. I think he averaged 2.8 yards per carry. Wright was significantly more efficient in that. So I lean Wright if picking a backup there, and maybe that's one where we could spend where we could move a little bit of work. Slowick also said that Wright has, quote, some speed, which is, always nice to hear. But on Achane, who's far more relevant, super impressive last year to average 5.7 yards per carry and post 1,350 rushing yards in that offense. He also had an 18.8% target share. I think the big question is, with a running quarterback like Willis, how much does that decline? Because you kind of think through it. If a quarterback has the ability to scramble instead of dumping it down to a running back, he's going to scramble. And we kind of saw that play out in practice when Willis was in Green Bay. And the 2 games Willis played the majority of last year, the Packers running backs had a 12.2% target share. In weeks 2 and 3 last year, weeks 2 and 3 of 2024, Packers running backs had a 12.5% target share. So we've seen that play out in practice a little bit. The issue, and why I don't think it's a perfect one-to-one comparison here, is that Achane is just so clearly the best pass catcher in this offense that it makes sense for them to prioritize getting him the ball as much as possible. We'll get to this wide receiver room in a minute, but it's easily the worst I think I've ever seen. So it just makes sense that they want to get Achane the ball out of the backfield as much as they can, despite Willis kind of deflating the attempts he gets in like the natural flow of the game if he's scrambling so much. But I have real like systemic concerns just about how good of a fantasy season a running back can have in an offense that I think is going to be this bad. I mean, if they're as bad as people think, there's also some possibility that we get to week 17 and they're deciding to dial back Achane's workload or something like that, just because they're so out of contention, and it doesn't make sense to risk their franchise running back with a big workload at that point. So I think that there's real concerns about how high the target share can be with a quarterback of Willis's play style. I think that there's concerns about how many touchdowns Achane will have on an offense this bad. I don't think there's much concern that he's going to dominate the backfield opportunities as long as he stays healthy. But I think that how valuable those opportunities are actually going to be is in big question, and kind of makes me not have a ton of interest in him at his current ADP.
I would rubber stamp 100% of what Jack just said. I think that was perfect analysis. The right part of it over Gordon I really like as well. That you noted the more efficient thing. He had more than 100 more yards than Gordon, even though they had the exact same workload. I had the exact same notes on Achane. I'll just throw out that with Slowick in the as the pass game coordinator last year, his targets and receptions fell just a little, but he added about 3 rush attempts per game last year. So in 2025 versus the 2024, and especially later in 2025, they were kind of not featuring him in the pass game quite as much as they did in 2024. He had a massive receiving role, over 85 targets. But you had Tua. I mean, you have a guy who turns every drop back into a pass attempt, gets the ball out, doesn't take sacks, doesn't scramble. Now you have, to what Jack said, the playmaking style of quarterback that tends to hold the ball a long time and then scramble a lot and sack a lot. They don't get down to their progression down to the running back. That's where it comes from. He has a high ADOT in his passes. He pushes it vertically. He holds the ball trying to find something vertically until he runs or gets sacked. He doesn't find the check down. Now, Achane will run some routes downfield as well. He had some air yards, and they did some of that. At least Mike McDaniel did some of that, but it's nice to know that Slowick was on staff. And to Jack's point, the other great note is he's probably their best pass catcher even as a running back, and so they'll probably continue to do that. But like Breece Hall's receiving cratered with Fields last year, same style of quarterback. It's not very conducive to this. I honestly thought I'd go lower with the targets as I started, and then to Jack's point, him being better than all the other guys, you're like, I'm not going to give all these other guys way more targets. Like, the teams are going to use their players that are good. They're going to find a way to throw to him a little bit. But Malik Willis' style is going to take him from the polar opposite of Tua's style to this. It's really rough for Achane's receiving. People are excited about his rushing efficiency because of the mobility of Willis, and I think that's fair. The Green Bay backs were very efficient when Willis is in there. We know mobile quarterbacks help that. But again, offense is not going to be good, as Jack laid out. And Willis's rushing probably hurts Achane's rush TDs. There was already concern about him at the goal line. Ollie Gordon stole like 4 rushing TDs last year. Jalen Wright had 2. Tyreek Hill famously in the preseason was talking about or maybe early in the regular season, they shouldn't use Achane at the goal line, like openly in the media sessions. Now your quarterback is maybe a threat to your rushing touchdowns in a very meaningful way. I have
think there's
HN
also
for a lot more TDs than you guys, and I don't like that. I'm all the way up to Jack's conclusion. I don't want to be in on HN. His projection can be okay. I don't see a lot of ceiling. It's a very small hit, big miss. If the efficiency craters because the offense craters, because I think Mike McDaniel has a lot to do with getting him into space and things as well. Even though Devon Achan's incredibly good, I'm not trying to take that away from him. It's just really tough to do what he did last year, 5.7 yards per carry in an offense like this. To me, feels very big miss if the efficiency craters as well.
Yeah, I think Mike McDaniel is just lauded as one of the best run game coordinators in the NFL. So I think losing that aspect is a big question mark on like, okay, how can Achan's efficiency sustain even when paired in a backfield with Malik Willis? Like I think losing McDaniel and that creativity and the way he's able to design a run game is probably a pretty brutal blow to Achan, again, despite his talents. One thing I am interested to see is how his alignment changes, or I guess stays the same this upcoming year. But 38% of his pass snaps have come in the slot or out wide each of the last 3 seasons, which is a massive number for a running back. You know, it's like the classic joke every offseason we hear running backs are going to get split out wide and or in the slot and run real wide receiver routes. And like Achan actually has and has been featured that way. So I'm curious if that holds with a new coaching staff. But it's a pretty high mark to hit. Like 38% is a lot. And I'm not convinced that will hold.
2 things. Even if they try to do it, I don't think you can execute it just because you put him out there. Like, you can try to put him out there, and Bobby Slowick is not Mike McDaniel. And then 2, Tua gets the ball out quickly and accurately in the short area, and I don't think people care enough about accuracy on, like, quick hitters. But, like, if they try to run that with Malik Willis, he's going to miss some of those throws in a way that Tua doesn't. It's going to be worse, even if they try to do it again.
We have this cool tool on the back end of ETR where we can like put in the quarterback over the last couple of years and look at the target per out run and route rate with all their pass catchers. And the Dolphins have had a lot of quarterbacks. They've had 5 quarterbacks over the last 2 years, but just looking at the Achan specific stuff, when Tua has been the quarterback, Devon Achan has a 28% target per out run. He had 148 targets on 537 routes. With the other 4 quarterbacks, he had an 18% target per out run, 24 targets on 135 routes. So 400 fewer routes in the sample, but a 10% dip in target per out run. And then you bring in, you know, Malik Willis. And again, just a lot of the concerns that we're highlighing here, I think are pretty real and you know, a pretty big detriment to his
when they did that as
profile.
well. Just some more like real NFL as I'm listening to you talk about it and thinking about it. They did a lot of shotgun, right? To it, like they've talked about wanting this offense to be under center. And the other note, when McDaniel went to the Chargers, when we did the Chargers, we talked about how he's had some comments about how he's been working with Justin Herbert's footwork because of the quick passing game. Again, it gets back to like some of the finer details and the coaching points and things that he probably worked with Tua on over multiple years that they've been able to get that stuff down. You can't just cut and paste Malik Willis into this role that led to Devon Achan splitting out wide and having those, because they're going to do the under center runs and then play action off of that. Like, where does that fit into that offense? It's not going to. I think I want to move his targets further down again.
All right, let's go to the wide receiver room. We've held this off for about an hour and 45 minutes here, but it is officially time to talk through the Dolphins pass catchers here. We have Malik Washington and Caleb Douglas tied for the team lead at 43 targets apiece at ETR. Gretch has Malik Washington leading the team here at 52 targets. Just insane that a team leader would be projected for 52 targets in the year 2026. But and then Tutu Atwell here is the other is another veteran receiver. We have him at 26 targets. Gretch is a little bit higher at 47. We have Jalen Tolbert, veteran wide receiver coming over from Dallas. We're at 26 targets. Gretch at 39. And then Chris Bell, we have at 39 targets. Gretch at 26. This is, you know, for lack of a better, phrase, like we're kind of throwing up our hands and saying, we don't fully expect or know how this is going to go. And I think training camp will help us a lot in this regard. This is also another team we have like a decent amount of unlisted target share. Again, just kind of, we don't really know who's going to be on the field here, because the vets they bring in, Jalen Tolbert and Tutu Atwell, were both signed to 1 year, $1.4 million deals. Very, very low in the market. And then Malik Washington, who's like the incumbent wide receiver, has a career 0.86 yards per route run through 2 seasons. So I think it's pretty hard to get excited about anyone here. I almost just kind of want to open up the floor, and like, Jack, if you want to talk about anyone specifically in this wide receiver room, feel free. There's no one getting drafted at this point outside of Malik Washington, who we're well behind ADP, but the rest of these guys are free. So, like that you could take a stab if you felt confident in one over the other. Or do you have any read or confidence in anyone in this wide receiver room?
I don't really, and with camp starting this week, it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. Like you said, Malik Washington has been on the team the longest. He also has a 5.1 career ADOT at 5'8" and 195 pounds. He averaged 5 yards per target last year at a 19% targets per route run. Caleb Douglas went in round 3, but he was widely expected to be a day 3 pick. I think it was a surprise to see him go that high. He wasn't an awesome college producer. He did run a 4.39 at 6'3", 209. The South Florida Sun Sentinels, David Furones, per Roto World, believed that Jalen Tolbert appeared to be one of Malik Willis's top targets in OTAs and minicamp. Jalen Tolbert was also at least temporarily sidelined and made a healthy inactive in favor of Jonathan Mingo last year with the Cowboys. Chris Bell, I think, is clearly the most interesting as an actual pass catching option, but he's coming off a November ACL tear. He's going to miss the entire offseason program as a rookie. He's likely going to be sidelined until mid-season. He was a potential first or second round pick, I believe, before getting hurt. But given that late timeline for a rookie, I don't think that he's going to contribute much as a rookie. Kevin Coleman Jr. is 179 pounds. He was a big-time recruit coming out of high school, but 179-pound slot receiver that got picked in the 5th round. Tutu Atwell was the Rams' pass-catching wide receiver 3 to start the year last year, with Jordan Whittington as the blocking wide receiver. He might have the most actual pedigree as a pass catcher in this room, but he also lost that pass-catching wide receiver role to Xavier Smith down the stretch last year and really got phased out of the Rams' offense. We have this not very concentrated, not even because we expect like some insane rotation, although it could shake out that way, but largely just because we have no idea what to expect here. It's pretty much a guess as opposed to a projection at this point in terms of who's really going to emerge.
It's really wild. And Chris Bell is someone I've been taking shots on at like the very last rounds of best ball, just thinking he was the best prospect coming incoming into this wide receiver room, and lost some draft capital just based on the ACL injury he suffered last year. I'm hoping that maybe he's healthy and playing down the stretch. But Gretch, any leans or insights to help us out to parse through this wide receiver room here?
Yeah, even that is annoying. Like, Bell's probably the better prospect, but he's coming off an ACL. They're talking about kind of a slow rookie year for him. He was posting a really good final season. That was his best year, but it did take him till like his 4th year to really earn targets. He's not like a great prospect or anything. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that I want to like deal with a guy coming off an ACL in his rookie year when it's not a good pass environment. Jack went through a lot of the other ones. I'll say Tutu Atwell, to me, he's definitely too small to run enough routes as far as I'm concerned, but he does have his efficiency moments and has tended to, and he had a really good a production profile out of college way back in the day, and he kind of always was able, like on a per route basis, to make some plays. And there's going to be a play action shot offense, so that's part of why I ended up projecting him a little bit more. Jalen Tolbert's bad. He had a chance to be the number 2 for Dallas before Pickens came to town. I'm not saying he should have been what Pickens is, but he did nothing even close. He had a ton of route volume that year and was just poor. And yet his 1.10 yards per route run that year, which is really bad, was actually a career high. All of his other small route samples have been worse than that year. Malik Washington last year, perfect situation. Tyreek Hill gets hurt, and he's like the perfect fit for that. And he had weak efficiency, didn't earn any downfield volume, didn't rise to the great opportunity. He's got some good ball in hand, but like the offense is now worse for him. It's a downfield shot play offense. It's similar to the stuff I was just concerned about with the quick passing game stuff for Achane. I don't think it works really well for Malik Washington. I have him at 52 targets. You're talking about like, yeah, I'm high. Like I didn't know I was going to wind up high on him by projecting him for 52 targets. I'll probably move it down. I think he'll get some carries. Like I had him for some carries. I don't really know. I think this is going to be a team that early in the year, you're going to see Malik Washington. You're going to see Jalen Tolbert. You're going to see some Tutu. And then as the season progresses, you're going to see more Caleb Douglas, some more Kevin Coleman maybe. And then certainly later in the year when Chris Bell's healthy enough, you'll see more Chris Bell as well. And he's probably the best bet, but like again, like I don't even know if the rookies, especially because you have all three of them, different profiles. They did get a nice mix of profiles here, like Douglas being a little bit taller and a little bit more of a vertical player, Coleman being a little bit more of a ball in hand guy like Jack was talking about. But I just don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze on them, given the pass volume and the uncertainty and how I expect the target totem pole to just kind of evolve over the course of the year. It's just not, I mean, whatever I'm putting in for a projection just seems like an absolute joke. Like it's going to be malleable. Play these guys off the waiver wire and redraft if you want to, or don't. Probably don't. Save yourself the headache.
I think it's a great point that the utilization here among like just which wide receivers are out there, I think is going to change a lot throughout the course of the season. Probably a little bit more veteran laden early on, and then as the season progresses, they probably lean a little bit more into the younger, kind of unproven guys. Maybe you could get a couple spike weeks from Tutu Atwell like throughout the year if they can hit on some deep shots. He certainly has kind of like the best, I guess, pedigree or profile of the vets. As he's only 26 years old. He was a second round pick. He's got almost 180 career targets. So has at least been like better than Jalen Tolbert and Malik Washington in that front, but hard to see him earning too much volume in this pass game. And yeah, I kind of think this wide receiver room is just going to be like best known as a name those guys in a couple of years here. We're going to be like, remember when Tutu Atwell and Jalen Tolbert were, starting for the Miami Dolphins
right.
in week 1 of 2026. Like, I think it's just going to turn into that. And if you look down the rest of their roster, they have a bunch of other names here, like Theo Weiss, D. Eskridge, Taj Washington. They also have Terrace Marshall and Jalen Reagor. I mean, anytime Terrace Marshall and Jalen Reagor are getting shots on teams, they're desperate. So I think it's a whole lot of nothing here for fantasy purposes.
The one note is probably that if Caleb Douglas or Kevin Coleman is like a really good player in a way that's not showing up in their profile necessarily, or if Chris Bell can get healthy enough and shows that he is as well, there's nothing stopping them from wind up being like the second half clear number one. Like, the pass volume is still going to be a concern, but they could be the pretty clear number one in their rookie year if you want to. I mean, that's probably like as I hear you talking about it again and heard everything Jack saying, like these veterans are bad, man. Like,
yeah, and they're signed, and the deals that they signed, right? And the deals they signed are nothing. Like they'll get moved aside if, like you said, if these young rookie wide receivers show a pulse, really. So I think that's fine. And they maybe even like something like Dynasty where they're probably just free because everyone's out on like the Dolphins pass game. They might be just an interesting stash or something just to see if they can show anything. Very, very limited opportunity cost for sure at this point in time. But everyone's going to be shouting at us, man, you guys are burying the lead here. Greg Dulcich is the guy you want and as a pass catcher in this offense. He's pretty much the only pass catcher with a realistic ADP right now. He's going at around pick 178 on Underdog. He's caught quite a bit of steam over the offseason as people, I think, are looking at this wide receiver room and don't have a favorite target. And so they're like, well, we might as well just go to tight end here with Greg Dulcich. And he did have a pretty solid end of the season last year. And on a per route basis, he had a 26% target per route run and 2.64 yards per route run, according to SIS last year, 10.2 yards per target there. He was a third round pick in 2022. Never been, like a good blocker, just primarily a pass catcher. He had a reasonable rookie season for the Broncos. He finished as the tight end 18 and half PPR points per game there in 2022. And he's going as a tight end 25 now. So obviously the pass volume is a concern in this offense, but Dulcich theoretically should be out there quite a bit. And, we just went through the whole wide receiver room, how lackluster it is. So, things could consolidate maybe on him. Jack, do you have much interest in Greg Dulcich's profile this year?
I think that he could have a decent target share. We've been behind on Dulcich all offseason, and I think it's mostly a function of the offense as a whole and the depressed pass volume rather than not expecting him to have a big role in the offense, because I think given the state of the wide receiver room and given how much they've talked him up all offseason, I think that he is going to have a pretty big role off the bat for them. It's just that in this offense, you have to really consolidate targets to be all that interesting. And I think that he can get a solid target share, given that he has never had more than 55 career targets in a season. He's only on a 1-year, $3.3 million deal. So you mentioned that he had really strong numbers to close last year, 26% target per out run in 3 games without Waller. At the end of the year, he had 20%, 19%, and 16% target shares. So he did earn targets last year without Waller. But despite that, he didn't draw a whole bunch of interest in free agency. So we have him second on the team in targets behind Achane. I think that given what we've heard all offseason, it makes sense to have him ahead of all of the wide receivers. But to be that relevant in this offense, you really have to have a high target share. And maybe I'm not giving him enough credit given the shares he did post to close the year. But given the what we've seen from him throughout his career, I'm not banging the table for him. I don't think he's terrible. We're very slightly below ADP. I think that's fair. But I question the ceiling unless he suddenly becomes this like monster target share guy that we haven't seen from him yet.
Yeah, I think the key would be that both you guys and me are projecting him to lead. I guess not lead the team because we both have Achane a little higher, but lead all the wide receivers and tight ends in targets, and yet still only being like I'm looking at my projections, still being in a range of like some of the highest tight end twos are close in my projections in terms of pure targets. Despite, so I think people are like, yeah, he could be the wide receiver one. It's like, yeah, but you got to understand how low the pass volume is in this offense. Dulcich 2.31 yards per out run on 145 routes last year is great to see. I do think the offense probably elevated that. It's similar to everything else we're saying with the other guys and the way that Tua plays and those things. Tua's a quick, accurate passer in the short area. Dulcich was doing low A-dot catch and run stuff. I don't expect that to translate per route on way more routes. On April 1st, the GM, John Eric Sullivan, was asked which player he was excited for taking the leap in 2026. He named Greg Dulcich as his answer to that. That's great. The round 2 tight end they drafted, Will Kazmarek, whatever. He's a Y tight end. He's a blocker. They called him a difference maker in the run game. He's not a guy that can't help you in the passing game. I just think his superpower is inline blocking is another quote from the team. Like they're basically telling you he's just a blocker. They drafted a round 5, really athletic tight end as well. Not necessarily a great profile, but like he may play more down the stretch as the receiving tight end though. If Dulcich is not, I mean, Dulcich is an intriguing profile. You know, once upon a time was a pretty good prospect, but he's had a long career now. I think it's tough to just assume he's going to play all season. There is a little bit of a veteran and young guy dynamic at tight end as well, where he could get surpassed throughout the year. But even if you do project him for all the targets, it's not that exciting of a projection. It just, to Jack's point, the ceiling, and I mean, I don't know where the ceiling comes from. I mean, you have to have a lot of efficient plays. The play action shot plays got to hit, long TDs. And even still, you're like, I mean, what did we talk about? Dalton Kincaid, like running a 3 yards per route run on decent route volume and was like tight end 15, you know? I mean, I think that's like more or less the ceiling for Dulcich in this offense.
Health has also been a pretty big concern for Dulcich. He only played 10 games his rookie year and then was largely just like not really on, you know, or didn't have a consistent role in 2023 and in 2024. And then, you know, kind of has that little bit of resurgence down the stretch for the Dolphins last year. But I do think that's fair to question, like if he can even withstand a full season. You know, I'm a little, I remember being like rug pulled going into a sophomore season thinking, oh man, just get this guy healthy. And then kind of like the pass catching chops he showed as a rookie, I thought were exciting at the time. But I'm a little bit just more bearish on, you know, he's only managed to play like 25 games in his NFL career at this through 4 seasons. So it's, I think a little bit tough for me to get there just given this team environment. All right, let's go to the good, the bad, the New York Jets here as our last team. Aaron Glenn remains the head coach here, but they did clear out a lot of the coaching staff. 8 assistant coaches have been fired since the start of 2025 here for the Jets, including both the defensive and offensive coordinator. So new offensive coordinator here is Frank Reich. He will also be the play caller of this offense. His first time in the NFL since he was the head coach of the Panthers in 2023, where he was fired after 11 games when they started off 1-10. He has not been just an offensive coordinator since 2017. You know, he has been a head coach in the NFL during that stint. So almost a decade here between offensive coordinator stints for Frank Reich. Very interesting hire for Aaron Glenn and the Jets. In terms of a team level projection, we're at 60.2 plays. Gretch is at 60.6. We're at a 61.3% pass rate. Gretch at 60.5%. So relatively similar there once again here on the Jets, which is nice to see. But Jack, curious your thoughts on the Jets here as a team level entering 2026.
Yeah, I'm not super excited about the Reich hire. I honestly don't hold the last couple of years against them too much. I know he went 4-8 at Stanford. I know someone who bets college football very seriously, and he said the Stanford roster last year was like the worst he'd ever seen in his entire life. So I think they went over their win total to get 4 wins. And then in 2023, with Bryce Young having one of the worst rookie quarterback seasons we've ever seen, I don't hold 2024 and 2023 against Reich too much. What I do hold against him is the fact that he's coming back to the pro game. That has changed very much in recent years, and he's now 64 years old. I think we've kind of discussed throughout this series that the how much the NFL game and NFL offenses on the whole have changed, and that the league is really trending toward younger head coaches. And a lot of these guys who have been doing it one way for a while might not be at the same level that they're used to, just because things have changed so much. And now Reich is coming back after a year off at 64 years old. We are pretty much in line on both play volume and pass rate. But overall, I think a lot of this offense's ceiling comes down to Geno Smith and how much he can get back to where he was with Seattle compared to where he was last year, because the skill positions actually have a decent amount of talent. It just comes down to the coaching and the quarterback play.
That was my takeaway as well, is that I think they've addressed the depth at the skill positions pretty well, because last year there was none. And I mean, it's funny, after week 1, Jets offense looked awesome. People were victory lapping like Tanner Engstrand, and it was like a lot of optimism. I mean, the team ended up being really bad, but I do think it was a bit reactionary. They waited like 3 weeks to fire him. I don't know. I have some questions about Aaron Glenn as well, I guess. Last year he was talking about Justin Fields. He's talking about he brings this dimension to the game that a lot of people are trying to create around this league that we can take advantage of, referencing the dual threat nature of Fields. And then the trends kind of moved away from QB mobility being this huge additional cheat code for offenses, and towards the like drop back passer and the under center, and a little bit more last year, and processing and some of these things, which I don't think athletic quarterbacks inherently can't process, but I do think they get away with their athleticism at the lower levels more. And so they don't, to make the NFL as a non-athletic quarterback, you have to develop processing capability at every level in a way that I think just is going to, on the whole, make them better. And then the ways that the defenses are doing so much to disguise things. Anyway, I thought Glenn was, I thought it was an interesting quote last year, and I was into it. It turned out that he was sort of kind of the copycat. We always talk about this as a copycat league, and you need to be influenced by other offenses that are doing things that are working, but also innovative. I'm bringing all this up because they drafted Sadiq this year in the first round, and he had an outright quote where he said, with Sadiq, we're going to be able to dictate. Are you going to be in base? Are you going to be in nickel? We've talked about the tight end stuff a ton. We've also talked about how defenses are going to be trying to evolve to stop that. I mean, Sadiq was a good pick where they took him, but they had just taken Mason Taylor last year as this mobile, two-way tight end, and they have a lot of needs. And I think it's really interesting to look at some of these quotes, and then I bring that up in reference to you move on from Engstrand on a first year OC who I just don't think it was his fault last year that the offense was what it was, and you go bring in Frank Reich, and that just looks very reactionary to me as well in terms of what you're doing and the decisions you're making and even the things that you're talking about. I think you're identifying what's happening in the league, but I think you are the copycat instead, or you're reacting and you're more reactionary. These types of coaches tend to. It's not to say that Glenn's like not a sharp coach, because I think he is probably, but I just think he's not probably innovating enough or at the forefront of and then that's not great. In addition to the Frank Reich elements that Jack was talking about, what he actually brings to an offense. So I'm concerned, but they do have a lot more talent.
Yeah, the Jets we have for the third lowest total TD projection in the league this season, so certainly not expecting them to be a prolific offense by any means. Just kind of like looking at the roster, I do think their offensive line and skill group, as you guys have alluded to, it is pretty talented. Armand Membu was a huge hit for them as a first round tackle pick last year. He had a great rookie season, and we're still waiting on Brandon Thorne's offensive line rankings to come out. The Jets are one I'm curious to see where he's at, because there has been a decent amount of hype for them and some of like the offseason content I've consumed up to this point in time. But Let's get into Geno Smith, brought in to play quarterback here for the Jets. He is signed to a 1-year, $3.3 million deal. So not a super meaningful deal there for a starting quarterback by any means in the low $3 million range there. We have Geno Smith for only 90% of the team pass attempts, just kind of baking in the risk that at some point throughout the season they go to either Cade Klubnik or Bailey Zappi. I saw was the QB2 in training camp. They also have Brady Cook, who got some run last year. So we don't have a full, again, passing share projection on Geno Smith. So we're going to come in a bit below Gretch here in terms of raw numbers on Geno Smith. But in terms of yards per attempt, we're also quite a bit lower. We're at 6.6 on Geno. And, we kind of have him like undraftable in best ball, just again, given not giving him the full allotment of the passing share. It's, very fair to say that Geno's season last year in Vegas was quite rough. It was at 6.8 yards per attempt. He had an 11% sack rate and led the league in interceptions last year. Geno Smith has run 52 interceptions over the last 4 seasons. So, enters his age 36 year. I think it's tough to have too much of a rosy outlook for Geno, but he did have close to 7.5 yards per attempt in Seattle. And we're not too far removed from that. So maybe there is a little bit of a bounce back candidate, upside here with Geno. But Gretch, curious your thoughts on Geno Smith. We have him kind of undraftable. Is he someone you would tack on in best ball drafts? Do you think he can help kind of elevate the floor of this Jets offense? Who again, I think we feel decent about the skill players. Just can the QB play be there to help them in fantasy?
I think you broke it down well. I think the Klubnik thing is tough. I ended up opting to just project Geno, but I had a note that, because Klubnik had kind of a tough last year in college, and they kind of talked about him having upside. He feels more developmental, but maybe he's a late 2026 guy. But yeah, Geno was really bad last year. Efficiency fell while his sack rate rose. Didn't even get off air yards in some games. Talked about with the Raiders when we did that projection. They had a bunch of games where they didn't even have 100 air yards because Geno couldn't even. But their offensive line was really bad. This is a team that there's optimism for this offensive line. They've added to it. They've taken young first-round picks for both tackle spots over, not the last 2 years, in 2024 and 2025, for Shanu and Membu. And they returned 4 starters. They added a free agent guard who played a ton for Vegas last year. I think most of the ranks I saw had him mid-pack. If their offensive line's better, if Geno's able to get some protection, because better than what the Raiders were last year for Geno after some injuries there. One thing I do like about Geno is he doesn't lack confidence. He seems like a guy that will come in and think that he's going to be the best quarterback in the league, and I'm all about it. Let's go try it out. He's also more of a one read and get the ball out kind of guy, and I do think that part of it is potentially the best thing that Garrett Wilson's had in his entire career. So, I think he's a reasonable fit for Garrett.
Let's go to the backfield first before we hit the wide receivers. I do think Breece Hall, again, if this offensive line does kind of play up to expectations, could have an interesting season here. He was also signed to a 3-year, $43.5 million deal this offseason with $29 million guaranteed. Pretty big guarantee for the running back space in this NFL market at this point in time. In terms of inputs on Breece Hall, we're at 228 carries. Gretch is at 240. We're at 55 targets. Gretch is at 63 there. When looking at the backups, we have Braylon Allen well ahead in terms of opportunities, as does Gretch. We're at 73 carries there. Gretch is at 68. We're at 31 carries on Isaiah Davis. Gretch at 59. So actually, he has it a little bit tighter on Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis. In terms of targets, we have 15.5 on both Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis. Gretch has Isaiah Davis ahead at 20 targets and Braylon Allen at 12 there. So Jack, Breece Hall is, not cheap at all this season, going at RB 14 right now, currently 28 overall ADP on Underdog. Any feel on Breece's outlook for this year and this Jets backfield?
Yeah, I think Breece has proven himself to be a really, really good NFL running back, and I think that the Jets rewarded him with the contract they gave him. I also think it's a little bit uncertain exactly how much he consolidates the work in this backfield. Aaron Glenn this offseason has referred to it as a three-headed monster. He also said that was the plan last year before the Braylon Allen injury. And we kind of saw that play out to start last year. In weeks 1 through 4, he had under a 64% design carry share in each game. The entire rest of the season, he only had under a 64% design carry share 4 times. So same number of sub 64% design carry shares in weeks 1 through 4 versus the entire rest of the season. I think Breece is a superior runner to Allen. They have similar yards after contact numbers, but Breece gets a lot more yards before contact. So I think that there's some possibility that Breece just completely sends Allen to the shadow realm, given the contract that he just got. But given the coach speak, it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like they are locked in on Breece getting 300 carries or anything all of a sudden. I do think that if Breece were to go down, it would be kind of a muddy backfield with Braylon likely getting the early down stuff and Isaiah Davis on pass downs. Davis has been really efficient rushing on very limited work throughout his career. I think part of that is that he gets a decent amount of his carries probably on 3rd and long. And Braylon Allen was out carrying Isaiah Davis 18-5 before he got hurt last year. So I think Allen is the early down backup and Davis is the pass down backup, which kind of makes it not a great situation on not a great offense if Breece were to go down. We've been below ADP on Breece most of the offseason. I think part of that is that we still have like non-zero work for both Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis. I think that if off a contract extension, Breece kind of makes either or both of them irrelevant, we are likely low on his volume and low on his projection as a result, but that's kind of where we come in on the Jets backfield.
Yeah, I'm concerned about it too. I think they like both the guys. One of the things on the backups, I thought I'd be in on Braylon Allen a little bit more. He was really young as a rookie. Both these guys are going into year 3, if I'm not mistaken, but Isaiah Davis is a little bit older. He's 24. He turns 25 in February. Braylon is 22 until January. So he's like 2 full years younger, even though they're the same age in NFL years, because Braylon Allen played as like a 20-year-old rookie. And there's a lot of talk that Braylon Allen's put on a bunch of weight this offseason. And I typically shy away from that, but when the guy's 22 years old, he's still, if the guys were putting on a bunch of weight before the combine, we would be pumped about it. And I mean, that's essentially where Braylon Allen should be if you look at it from the perspective of his age. So anyway, I think Braylon Allen still growing into his body and adding weight and those things is maybe actually a little bit more defensible at his age. And yet the last couple of years, like Isaiah Davis's evasion, yards after contact per attempt, breakaway rate, they've all been better than Braylon Allen's both years and solidly. I think Isaiah Davis is like a pretty good backup running back as well. Braylon Allen gets a little bit more pub. It's tough to figure out, but that's part of why I had a little bit more for Davis and I have the split a little closer. I have Allen for a few more rushes. I have Davis for a few more targets. He played a little more in the pass game, if I'm not mistaken. But no, I'm pretty into Breece. Breece's targets per out run by season, 27.5%, 26.8%, and then 19.5%, then all the way down to 15.6% last year. The first couple years showed some real clear intent in the pass game. Year 3, the routes were a career high, and so he still had that was a solid targets per out at 19.5% when he was approaching 400 total routes. Last year, the Jets basically didn't use him as a receiving weapon in the same way. I do think they want to move back that way, and Geno threw to Ashton Jeanty a lot last year. Reich's offenses in the past have thrown to running backs some, certainly. So I don't know. I'm kind of back in on Breece a little bit this year, but I do see some concern with the overall split with having some legit backup depth.
I'm torn on Breece, and I'm kind of surprised at how expensive he's gotten. Again, he's up towards like the front of the 3rd round in terms of ADP this offseason. And meanwhile, like Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis are both cheap, whereas last year Breece was I think at the 4-5 turn. We were well ahead of market on him last year, and Braylon Allen was catching a ton of steam. I think Braylon Allen got up to like the 130s in underdog ADP last year, and kind of flamed out mostly due to injury, and then is just essentially free this year. So I think it's an interesting dichotomy that people are all the way back in on Breece. I know there were contract and like trade concerns going into last year, which I think muted people's excitement as well as playing next to Justin Fields, and maybe those concerns are alleviated, but I don't necessarily think it's like the cleanest run out here again for a running back on the offense. We project to score the 3rd fewest TDs in the league. It's not, I don't think the cleanest. I do think you definitely need like the pass game role to come back big time for Breece. And you can certainly see the pathway there with Geno Smith and Gretch, like you alluded to, Frank Reich kind of featuring running backs throughout his career, but has been a guy I think we've struggled to stay in line with ADP on so far this offseason. Let's go to the wide receiver room, headlined by Garrett Wilson here, but they also have Adonai Mitchell and then draft Omar Cooper in the first round, and then also draft another first round pass catcher in Kenyon Sadiq. He is listed at tight end here, but we can kind of loop him in this conversation a little bit in terms of targets on Garrett Wilson. We're at 133. Gretch is at 144. On AD Mitchell, we're at 73. Gretch is at 82. And on Omar Cooper, we're at 73, and Gretch is at 82. So we're both even on AD Mitchell and Cooper in terms of raw target numbers there, and then have Garrett Wilson as the prohibitive wide receiver one here. And Jack, we've been well ahead of market on Garrett Wilson all off season. Has been a pretty heavily drafted player for me, heavily targeted player through his first 4 years of his career, and then does get Geno Smith at quarterback, which is probably the best quarterback he's played with, which is again just still wild to say, entering Wilson's 5th year. So what's your read on this Jets wide receiver room?
Yeah, the Garrett projection, we have been high all offseason. It feels a little bit uncomfortable. I think part of it, as we kind of talked about with the Browns in the AFC North podcast, is that the market does tend to double count some of these really bad offenses and how bad they're going to be. I know that we just kind of said we're out on all Dolphins because of how bad they're going to be, but that's largely a pass volume thing, and partially a strength of the offense thing. But in a more normal looking offense that's expected to be bad, I think that the market sometimes tends to double count that. The target earning, I think, is interesting on where exactly to put Garrett, and I like seeing that Gretch is kind of has the same gap of targets as we have on most of these high-end wide receiver ones, because Garrett Wilson has had really monster target shares. He had a 33% target share last year, 28% in 2023. He's had above a 0.26 targets per route run in 2 of the last 3 years. The year in which he didn't have that was in 2024 when Rodgers decided he wanted to throw to Davante Adams all the time. But this is more target competition than we're used to seeing with Garrett Wilson. AD Mitchell has quietly also been a really strong target earner, oftentimes in a partial role, to be fair. He had a 29% target per route run in 2024, 26% with 0 target competition on the Jets last year. He hasn't been efficient. Some of that is his own fault. Some of that is his quarterbacks. But he has earned targets with both the Colts and the Jets. And the reporting all offseason has been that he's ahead of Omar Cooper. Omar Cooper still, though, first-round pick who you figure will be involved. Similar production to Elijah Surratt, who we talked about in the AFC North podcast with the Ravens and who went a few rounds later than Cooper. But Cooper has drawn some Deebo Samuel comps. I think they like what he can do with the ball in his hands. And then they drafted Kenyon Sadiq as well, another first-round tight end. So this is all to say that Garrett Wilson has significantly more target competition than we're used to seeing. But with that being said, he's just been a really consistent target earner throughout his career. And so we're kind of leaning into that instead of giving a ton of credit to some of these first-round picks who, in Cooper's case, doesn't have the best statistical profile from a production standpoint. Sadiq, we've seen first-round tight ends come along a little bit slowly, and Sadiq is also coming off an offseason hernia procedure, so he hasn't been available for much of the offseason. And then AD Mitchell, we haven't really seen be relevant for an entire season, despite the target earning and a limited sample. So I have some concerns on Wilson from a target share standpoint. It's not like we're projecting him for the same target shares that he's had in the past years because we're aware that he has increased target competition. But I do think the extent to which said target competition impacts him is up for debate. Is he going to fall down to a 25% target share or a 27% target share? Because that makes a really big difference on where you should take him in drafts. And so it is reassuring to see Gretch kind of in the same vicinity as us target-wise.
I thought you broke that down really well. It does get back to his target earning ability. His targets per run strong again last year at 24%, 8+ targets in all 6 of his healthy games last year. He only ran 225 routes due to injury. He ran at least 595 in his first 3 seasons. He's basically been the clear number 1 at all points, other than that half season after they acquired Davante Adams and had Aaron Rodgers. He kind of took a back seat for a bit, but he's pretty much out-earned and out-produced every other receiver that's been in this passing game now. Jack did a great job of breaking down how they have some much more interesting profiles. On Adonai Mitchell, I guess I have some real concerns with the efficiency. It's not just like, for me, it's the Colts last offseason we're talking about is down-to-down consistency, is blocking, all those things. A lot of people were really in on the really high targets per route run on his rookie season and saying, like, this is going to expand into year 2. We want to be in on efficient rookies going into year 2. And the Colts are basically telling you, like, yeah, I mean, we wanted to throw him the ball whenever he was out there. He creates separation. That's what he does. But, like, he can't catch the ball. He can't block anyone. He runs the wrong routes. He does everything wrong. And they traded him midseason. Like, he was a day 2 pick they liked. Like, and then we're using him and throwing to him a lot. Traded him midseason. He got a bunch of volume with a Jets team that had nobody, as Jack mentioned. I do think the Jets seem more interested in putting up with those inconsistencies than the Colts were, and they were running him a lot more routes. But, like, to me, there's a bit of Deontay Johnson here, where it's like he runs a lot of routes, he earns a lot. Not necessarily running a lot of routes, earns a lot of volume per route, but can't be efficient on it, and seems to make everyone mad around him. Like nobody seems to really actually like anything else that he's doing other than the fact that he creates separation, and the fact that he's gotten good reports, like. He always gets good reports in padless practices. This guy creates separation. We know that about Adonai Mitchell. We also know that he does literally nothing else. I mean, that's like, unfortunately, like, might be the reality about him. I did project him for 80 targets this year. Like, I think he's going to be, a pretty involved number 2. But Omar Cooper looks like the upside play there as the secondary receivers to me. You mentioned the Debo comp, the good yak, 4.42 speed at 199, good vertical, strong hands. They like his blocking. There's all this, like, ball in hand, and, like, he can be out there, he can block, he can do all these things. He's supposed to be the rookie, but, like, they seem like they want to trust him for some of the other stuff right away that maybe Adonai Mitchell can grow into in year 3, but the Colts especially didn't like in his 2 years and eventually traded him midseason. Now, I mean, that was part of a deal to acquire Sauce Gardner. I have to be, fair, with the way that I'm breaking that down. But I do think Omar Cooper looks like a pretty intriguing player from an athleticism and style fit perspective, although not a huge prospect profile, as Jack said. I mean, Surratt was not just comparable last year, but a meaningfully better producer than him the year prior. To me, Surratt in some ways looks like the better player, just not as athletic, and then maybe the NFL wasn't looking at the production side of the receiving profiles. We know that they tend to overdraft sometimes the athleticism side, although I'm not trying to say that Cooper's a bad prospect. I think he's good as well, but I think there's some real concerns with Cooper as far as, like, being an alpha when he was essentially outproduced over the last 2 years on his own team by a guy who wound up going in whatever it was, round 4. But Garrett Wilson, yeah, I mean, very clear alpha target earner to me. Seems to be a guy that I think will be strong. Cooper did earn volume in college as well, I should say, but Sadiq not so much. Didn't play a ton. Sadiq's just like, I mean, Sadiq's another world, but we can. What are your thoughts on the receivers, Mark?
Well, yeah, just a couple of notes on AD Mitchell specifically. I mean, he has a 43% catch rate in his career to this point. That's just not going to get you very far. And the Colts gave him that last shot in that Rams game. Remember when he had that unbelievable catch and run, and then he dropped the ball right before the end zone. And I think it ended up for a touchback, or the Rams. Anyway, it turned from a Colts, like, super long, unbelievable touchdown by AD Mitchell to a turnover. And then in that game, he played 89% of the snaps. The following week, he played 9% and then 8%. Like, after that mistake, the Colts were done with him, and then they traded him. Like you mentioned, like he just continues to make boneheaded decisions slash mistakes. I think the year prior to, he had, like, a holding call on the opposite end of the field that really hampered one of their big plays. Like, kind of like you mentioned, Gretch, he just struggles to get out of his own way a little bit, despite the target earning and separation skills being there. Maybe the opportunity could continue to present itself in New York, but given that the fact that they spent 2 first-round picks on pass catchers and Omar Cooper and Kenyon Sadiq, like, I don't think it's like the longest runway you've ever seen there. And then Cooper is just, I think, like, the cheapest, round 1 wide receiver right now, going at pick 144 on Underdog, wide receiver 59. I think it is a pretty exciting price just to take a stab on a guy who had a very prolific, final season in college. And he did move to the slot. He was 80% slot last year. In the year prior, he was playing more outside. And I think that's where the the production, suffered a little bit. So he'll probably be, I think, mostly slot only to start, just with AD Mitchell and Garrett Wilson more so outside. But they're at least, some of like the analysts I was reading, Lance Zierlein and Matt Harmon were saying, they do think that Omar Cooper could play outside in the NFL. It's not like he's going to be a, slot reliant player only. So yeah, let's talk about Sadiq though. He is coming off hernia surgery, so he missed mini camp. He should be good to go by training camp, but made waves at the combine by running a 4.39 40-yard dash, fastest ever by a tight end. So curious, Gretch, if you feel decent about him as a prospect. He's been someone that I'm surprised like how cheap he is in best ball drafts, just given the mid first round draft capital and then the very exciting athletic profile. He's going as a tight end 21 right now. We're a little bit ahead of ADP at tight end 19. Gretch, what are your thoughts on Sadiq here?
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably just start by saying I want to emphasize how good of an athlete this guy is. I mean, he ran a 4.39 40. He's undersized for a tight end. He's 6'3", 241. Like, that's football size, even though that's undersized for a tight end. He's 6'3", 241 pounds, and ran a 4.39. He jumped 43.5 vertical, over 11 feet broad. He's a freak athlete. Like, this is one of the greatest athletes in the league from day one. Like, immediately, he's super young. He's age 21 until next March. He didn't have a huge production profile in college, although he played only at young ages and then was an early declare. He only ran 519 routes total in college. The bulk of that came in the final season. The yards per route run that last year is just okay. For college, 1.62. I mean, it's not bad or anything for a tight end in college. Like, tight ends don't tend to be super productive in college. 19.4% targets per route, 8.4 yards per target. It's good. It's maybe not great. He's more of a projection as a very young rookie who won't turn 22 until next March. They also have emphasized his blocking along with his pass catching. Like, they're giving you all this, like, everything you want to hear about him, which you would expect with the size, speed, and the athleticism. Like, that's one of the things with some of these blocking tight ends. We're talking about that Kakmarak guy from Miami. Like, he's a good athlete. Like, even the blocking tight ends need to be good athletes to be able to block the ends and stuff. Well, this dude's a great athlete. Kenyon Sadiq's a great athlete. He's a great athlete in the pass game. He's a great athlete as a blocker. He's going to be on the field. I'm a little concerned that Frank Wright's teams always use multiple tight ends and kind of split routes with the Colts for years, and he did that with the Panthers as well. I'm also concerned that Mason Taylor looked like he had a decent rookie year, and pre-draft they were hyped on him. They were talking about him taking a step forward. He actually led the team in targets and receptions last year, with Wilson getting hurt and Mitchell only playing half the year. They both wound up in the high 50s for targets, but Taylor had 65 targets in 13 games last year to lead this team. Decent 17.6% targets per route for a tight end. Had a low yards per target, which pushed his yards per route run down, but him also running 353 routes as a rookie was probably pretty decent signal, I thought. In my pre-draft field tippers piece, I thought he's young enough. Year two improvement was something to look for. And then they go and draft Sadiq, who I just think Sadiq is just the far superior profile and upside, bet. But the fact that Taylor is still an interesting year two tight end and Sadiq's a very young tight end might make it difficult for Sadiq to do everything you'd want right away in year one. At the same time, he's going so late and he's way more intriguing from an athleticism standpoint than his ADP. I definitely like taking some shots on Kenyon Sadiq. He's fun.
Yeah, you could say that the offseason surgery and missing minicamp is also a little bit of a red flag just in terms of getting on the field when you do have Mason Taylor ahead of him. But I think the long-term prospects here are pretty strong. Jack, I guess I neglected to mention our inputs here on Kenyon Sadiq. We're at 68 targets. Gretch is at 61. On Mason Taylor, we're at 42, and Gretch is at 36. So I think we're just a little bit higher on the tight end target share here overall, Jack. But any thoughts on this tight end room?
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of things on Sadiq. His production was muted early in his career, but he was behind Terrence Ferguson, so I think that you can excuse that a little bit. And he also had 2 kickoff returns in college, which you don't really see out of the tight end position. So that's certainly a unique profile. And just something that kind of came to my mind hearing Gretch talk about the Mason Taylor stuff, and along with what he said about the Jets potentially being the copycat in a copycat league, is that the Jets were 5th in 11 personnel rate last year, near the bottom of the league in both 12, and then they ran 0 13 personnel last year. So that's the big kind of trend and talking point of the offseason. So if we think the Jets are the copycat instead of the innovator, which they certainly seem to be, we could see this Sadiq pick being kind of a response to what we saw last year and the Jets wanting to play more multi-tight end stuff because they saw that work last year. And so the Sadiq investment could signal that they want to get both Sadiq and Mason Taylor on the field. They're different types of tight end, with Taylor probably being more of like the do-it-all tight end. His thing coming out of college was more of like a jack-of-all-trades, master of none type of player, and then Sadiq is the athletic freak with the pass-catching upside who can block a little bit, but certainly more of a pass catcher. So that just kind of got me thinking, given the copycat stuff we talked about when we were discussing the team level stuff. But yeah, I think Sadiq is an interesting upside play simply because of the capital invested and the athletic pro.
Love it. All right, that will do it for episode 7 of this divisional projection series. Only one more to go, fellas. Thanks again to Jack and Gretch for all of the great insight. Be sure to find them on Twitter at JackMiller02 and at Yards Per Gretch. I'm on there at Mark Dank. Appreciate everyone tuning in with us. We'll be back next for our final episode breaking down the NFC East. Have a great day, everybody, and peace out.